Irish Breakdown Nation, welcome back to another episode of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. Happy Thursday. We're a day away from Friday. We are one day closer to Notre Dame kicking off on August 31st down in Miami against the Hurricanes. But before we get there, we have a lot of topics to discuss. But before we can start diving into the team and individual position groups, today we're going to talk big picture about something. And it's that Notre Dame and Marcus Freeman still have a lot of respect to be earned despite their magical 2024 season where they went on a national title run, ended a 31-year major bowl win drought. And then just to put a little bit of a cherry on top, they did it again 7 days later. You would think that there would be a lot more respect put on Notre Dame's name and the Golden Domers in South Bend, but unfortunately that's not the case. So in part one of today's show, we're going to focus on the team specifically. We're going to talk through where Notre Dame ranks in some of the post-spring top 25s that we've seen come out. I'm sure a lot of you guys have seen them on social media. We're also going to look at some, draft boards and position rankings and see where some Notre Dame players fall on there. And then we're going to talk through just what does Notre Dame need to do to get into the respect ranks that some of these other programs have had. We're going to talk about what perceptions still exist about Notre Dame. And then in part two of today's show, we're going to talk about that from a Marcus Freeman perspective, because just like there's been a lot of post-spring top 25 rankings for the team itself, there's not a lot of people that have Marcus Freeman in the top 3, top 4 of their college football coaches heading into this upcoming season. We're going to break down some of the narratives that we believe exist with Marcus Freeman. We're going to talk about some coaches ranked ahead of him, and we're going to try to break down why that is. And we're going to talk about why the perception is what it is. And then you guys know the drill. If there's time pending at the end of the show today, we are going to do a mailbag. So as questions, comments come up throughout the show, be sure to put a little MB or a mailbox emoji so that lets Bryan and I know to set those questions aside. But to get us started today, Bryan, where we're going to start is we're going to talk about the team as a whole, because Notre Dame still has plenty to prove. And I know you dropped a little nugget in there about how we're pretty fired up today. So we're in for a good show today, man.
Yeah, it's Marcus Freeman and Notre Dame still have something to prove, and part of this analysis is legitimate. Like, look, you can't just be a one-hit wonder and expect everybody to think that you're Georgia or you're Ohio State, teams that have won championships. I understand that, but then it kind of goes too far in certain areas of the critiques of Notre Dame, and in other areas it's like, okay, I could understand your critique or your skepticism about Notre Dame, but not when you have that team ahead of them, or that team ahead of them, or that team ahead of them. Or I could understand you saying, hey, Marcus Freeman's got to show me more in this regard or that regard. And I'm like, okay, cool. I agree, but not when you're going to have that guy ahead of him and that guy ahead of him and that guy ahead of him. And that's a lot of my frustration is a lot of the analysis, Trevor, is inconsistent. It's lazy, it's uninformed, and not all of it is all of those things. These are different things that I'm seeing, and not everybody feels that way. Andy Staples dropped a top 25 ranking, I think about a week or so ago. He had Notre Dame number 2 behind Texas. So this isn't everybody. Bill Bender has Notre Dame number 5 at Sporting News. I'd put him higher, but I'm okay with where he has them, even though there's at least one team I'm like, yeah, I wouldn't put that team ahead of Notre Dame. But some of it I can get. And it's not even necessarily the number 7 ranking that ESPN did today that really frustrates me, Trevor. It's the why and the who they have in front of them and where they have other teams ranked, because what we're seeing with some of these analysts, CBS Sports, ESPN, and some of these different things, it is a Notre Dame bias, but it's not in the way that fans often think it is, or we often say that it is, in that it's like, I hate Notre Dame, so I'm going to tear Notre Dame down and never give them respect. That's not what I'm referring to. That's not the kind of bias that I think is going on specifically in these rankings. I think it's more of just, I'm still living in the world where Notre Dame was this in the past, and so I'm still assuming that last year's team was no different than 2012 Notre Dame or 2015 Notre Dame or 2018 Notre Dame or 2020 Notre Dame. And to some degree, I understand that. And coming into this conversation, because we were originally going to talk about this on Tuesday. So I'm kind of happy. Thank you, Pete Bavacqua and the AD at Clemson, for the scheduling thing that you guys did that got us to talk about this on Tuesday. So we moved this topic to Thursday. We were going to talk about this because there is some stuff that Marcus Freeman and Notre Dame need to prove. But then the reasoning for some of this is so bad. The lack of being informed on this is so bad. Like, Trev, I was going to post my top 25 rankings like last week, but it took me so long to kind of really do thorough research to make sure I was spot on about things. I moved a couple teams around from when we did our show, but then just make sure I'm being accurate with how I'm describing this team and being fair about things I like and things I'm concerned. And we're not seeing that with a lot of these rankings. And that was really where I went from. This will be a good, cool topic to discuss. And there's some legitimacy to what some people are saying, but also some things where you're like, yeah, that's an old school way of thinking about Notre Dame, that Notre Dame still has to prove that they're incorrect. And then a couple have come out, and I'm like, it's like CBS Sports came out with one a day or two ago, and I'm like, come on, seriously? And then ESPN came out with one. USA Today had one last week where you're just reading it. I'm like, do you guys not even have like any familiarity with this team whatsoever? And then it also, my frustration is coupled with just a lot of this offseason analysis about this team that's driven me nuts. Like, I'm hearing nationally, it's like, oh, Steve Angeli's going to be starting quarterback. Who are you talking to? I know it's not the Notre Dame coaches. I know they're not telling you that. I'm certainly not telling you. Like, who are you talking to? Because other than Adam Rittenberg, I didn't see anybody from the national people at Notre Dame practice this year. So if Adam Rittenberg said, hey, I think Steve Angeli should be starting quarterback, I'm like, okay, I don't agree with them, but at least I saw him at a couple of the practices. You know, it's like, I don't know where this is coming from. And a lot of this is, I just think people are just kind of jumping on board. Well, everybody's high on this team, so let me jump on that team because I don't want to be the team that ranks them 8th and they end up being really good. Or I don't want to be the team that puts them higher and then they end up falling back and then everybody else, and then I look stupid. And I think that's what's going on with a lot of this. But I just think a lot of it's just uninformed, and that frustrates me. That really, really frustrates me. So, man. And like last year this time, Trev, we said, look, anything from 7 to 10, we understood. I personally thought Notre Dame was better than 7 to 10. I thought they had a chance to be better in that 7 to 10 range. But you understood it because there were some question marks. Now, I don't know where that's coming from. And some of the things that they say as to why they have Penn State ranked high, they don't apply to Notre Dame. And that's the frustration, because you look at the top 4 teams that in the playoff last year, and you think about Texas and Ohio State and Penn State and Notre Dame. Only one of those teams has really proven anything in the last decade from the standpoint of, can they win a championship? That's it. And that's Ohio State. Why is Texas getting the benefit of the doubt? Why is Penn State getting the benefit of the doubt? Why is, look, Georgia, I get, but why are those 2 teams getting the benefit of the doubt that Notre Dame is not? And like the CBS Sports one from Dennis Dodd, and, like that he did like post spring when he had Miami number 3, it's the same type of thing. Now, CBS came out with an updated top 25, and they dropped Miami down to 11, but I'm still like, that's still pretty low. But why does Oregon get the benefit of the doubt from people who do rankings? Like, those are the things that I don't understand and that I get frustrated by, because there's not a consistent analysis. Like, for example, when you and I do our rankings, Trev, one of the things you've talked about with Notre Dame has been like, look, that's fine. I understand what you're saying, but I just need to see it. And then you apply it relatively consistently. And that's totally fine. But when you're doing these rankings and you're saying, well, I'm going to say this about Notre Dame, but then I'm going to, kind of rank them not here. And so I'll dive into some more specifics when we really dive into the ESPN thing. But I do think there's a notion for Notre Dame, and this is where I would say that's a fair criticism of Notre Dame. Notre Dame does have to prove that they're not a one-hit wonder. It was a down year in college football, which we've admitted. It was a year where there was no super team until Ohio State started to kind of play like one in the postseason. But even then, that Ohio State team is not beating 22 Ohio State, much less 22 Georgia. You know what I mean? Like, they're not beating 21 Georgia. They're not beating – I don't know that this past year's Ohio State team, they don't beat 2023 Michigan. They couldn't even beat 2024 Michigan. right? So they were the best team this year, but they weren't some juggernaut. So I understand Notre Dame's got some stuff to prove. I get that. I embrace that. But apply it consistently, because Notre Dame still having something to prove should have them no lower than 5. Where like a Bill Bender has them. I didn't bust Bill. Like, I kind of sent Bill a text, and I think he and I are going to do some sort of show this summer about, like, just talking about it, just different things we have. Because I love debating with Bill. Because he's smart. You got to come prepared when you're going to debate with Bill Bender. Like, he knows his stuff. He's a sharp guy. And I joked with him, like, hey, I'll bet you steak dinner that Notre Dame finishes ahead of Georgia. Here's Georgia 3rd, Notre Dame 5th. I'm not beefing with him on that. That's a friend of mine that I'm just kind of busting his chops a little bit. I actually am literally going to bet him a steak dinner on it because I actually believe what I said, but I have no problem with his ranking because I can understand people putting Georgia ahead of Notre Dame. You will not hear me rant about how do you put Georgia ahead of Notre Dame when Notre Dame beat them by 13 and they lost more players than Notre Dame did. That's why I don't have them ahead of Notre Dame. But I can understand why people who their down year for Georgia was 11-3 SEC title team. Year before they were 13-1, and the 2 years before that they won the title. I don't agree with having them there, but I understand them getting the benefit of the doubt. I understand putting Ohio State ahead of Notre Dame. I have Ohio State ahead of Notre Dame. You don't, but I understand it, and I think you can as well because they've proven it. I don't understand Texas. I don't understand Clemson because Clemson hasn't been that team in a long time. I don't understand Penn State. And to a degree, and I definitely don't understand LSU. And we'll get into that one here in a minute. But I do think this is why this 2025 season is so huge for Notre Dame to get back to the semifinals. Not to say, obviously they win it all, they shut everybody up. That's an easy one. That's a 90-second show where it's about 120 seconds or about 80 seconds of intro and then 10 seconds of, if Notre Dame wins the title this year, they shut everyone up. Have a great rest of your day, everybody. We'll talk to you later. We got to figure out a way to get like all the ad reads into this 90-second show, but we'll figure it out. So, but like there is a level of, obviously, if they win it all, if they get back to the championship game and have a competitive game, obviously that silences a lot of people. But I think getting back to the semis for a second straight year is something that, before we get into the specifics of the laziness of these rankings, we can objectively look at this and say they do have something to prove this year. And if Notre Dame is a one and done in the playoff or doesn't make the playoff with the talent that they have, then we can say, hey, maybe last year was a little bit of a everything went right type of season in certain ways. And not that they're still not a really good program, but maybe they're not on that same level as Ohio State and Texas and Georgia yet. And they did have that kind of, like you said, miracle season. And I like that you used that word because we're being a little bit tongue-in-cheek with that because that's the way it's being perceived, that it was a miracle season, that they played above their potential. We don't agree with that, but obviously a lot of outsiders do. But I think that a second season in a row is something where you need to say, look, you've strung 2 in a row now, and people will then start to believe. Not everybody, because there's always going to be sort of the Notre Dame haters, but I don't view Mark Schlabach as a Notre Dame hater at all. I think Mark Schlabach is wrong on Notre Dame. I think he was wrong a lot on Notre Dame last year. He kept not putting him in his playoff, and then eventually he'd get him up to like 8-9. They ended up being, a little bit higher than he had them. But I just think he's wrong. I think it's bad analysis, but I don't think he's got some burning, I hate Notre Dame, so let me bang on Notre Dame. I've never got that sense from Mark Schlabach. I just think sometimes he's wrong. But it's just those people will never like Notre Dame. Even if they win it all, they'll find some reason to be like, well, that's because such and such SEC team got knocked off in the semifinals and you match up better against this team. You're lucky because you didn't have to play Georgia or Bama this year. Something like that. But the majority of the people who I respect, they'll kind of come around. And David Pollack used to really be down on Notre Dame. He would just never give them the respect that I felt they deserved. That's changed in the last year. He did give them a lot of respect last year. Greg McElroy started I think Notre Dame might have the best secondary in college football before the season. So I think real football people are looking at this team being like, guys, there's something different here. But it's a lot of the talking heads and the journalists, as opposed to the football people, are late to the party because I still think they're relying on lazy narratives or past narratives that aren't necessarily true to this team. And that's kind of my big picture frustration, while also embracing the idea, Trev, that Notre Dame still has some things to prove.
Which they do, man. And the lack of consistency with these rankings is what bothers me as well. If I just look at Notre Dame in a vacuum, they do have a lot to prove. Because let's look at what their track record has been for the last decade, really even farther. Every season that Notre Dame followed up with a playoff run, a national championship experience, they didn't live up to expectation that following season. And then you go back and you look at, okay, 2024 was a great season, but it was really the first year since 2020 that Notre Dame had lived up to expectation. 2021 was a disappointment. 22 was a disappointment. 23, with all the hype surrounding Sam Hartman coming in, and this is a new look Notre Dame team, they ended up playing in the Tony the Tiger Sun Bowl. In this past season, it's finally come to fruition. It's okay. The things that we've been talking about and the things that we've seen written on the wall have finally come to fruition for Notre Dame. Where the separation is the people who follow this team, the yous and eyes of the world, the other people that are putting a little bit more respect on Notre Dame's name, see it going past. We don't view it as a one-off, whereas some of the national narrative is the lazy route of, well, it was just a magical season. Some of that I'm going to touch on in part 2 of the show when we talk about Marcus Freeman. But Bryan, let's dive into some of the specifics. We've been talking about these national rankings. I'm going to rattle off a few here before we really dive into some of these. And to paint the picture for you all, some of these rankings, Sporting News had them ranked number 5. USA Today had them ranked number 7, below Clemson, below Georgia, below LSU. 247 Sports had them ranked at number 7, below Georgia, Oregon, Clemson. Texas was number 1. And then the one that we've been talking about, the one that just kind of pushed us over the top a little bit, was the ESPN ranking that came out earlier this morning, where Notre Dame was also ranked 7th, and they were behind Georgia, they were behind Texas, they were also behind LSU, who was ranked number 6. And that is starting to become a common theme outside of the outlier being Andy Staples, who put them at 2. And some of the questions that I have is, what did you see? These are post-spring rankings. So what did you see from this team from the start of March to April that made you move them down in your list? Or what did you see from these other teams that you can confidently say, well, look, I think these teams are just better than Notre Dame? Because even in our post-spring rankings, we even said there were some teams that, look, this team didn't do anything wrong. Team A didn't digress. We just believe that Team B took a bigger jump in the spring. That's why we moved the rankings what they did. And the explanations within the article are not up to par with justifying moving Notre Dame the way that they did. So, Bryan, I'm going to pass it over to you because I know there is a lot of things that we need to talk about for these rankings that came out.
Here's the thing, Trev. When I look at these rankings, a couple things that you see that are themes that are understandable, like, okay, Notre Dame's got to show something here. If they were going to talk about it, like, and this is where they keep talking about quarterback, losing Al Golden, losing this player. And there's not a lot of talk about what they have coming back. And that's my frustration with this. I think you could say, hey, listen, will Notre Dame have a defensive line good enough without Riley Mills, without Howard Cross, to make another run at the title game? It's a fair question. You and I might say, well, yeah, they do, but I can understand why somebody on the outside who's not here every day covering this team, who doesn't break down as much film as you and I do, who covered Notre Dame, would come to that conclusion.
Sure.
Okay, yes, Malachi Fields is a good player, but do they really have the kind of pass game weapons you need to really take the pressure off of a redshirt freshman quarterback who can't run like Riley Leonard? You did lose 2 starters from your starting offensive line. 3 guys that started multiple games last season. Maybe they don't know as much about Jagasol or certain guys as we do. Okay, that's fair. And so I look at things and I say, okay, the issue I have is nobody's really addressing the legitimate things that you could bring up that could determine if Notre Dame is a team that can once again make another run. The issue that I have is that those things are also true for other teams that are ranked higher than Notre Dame who proved less than Notre Dame. And that's really what it comes down to, Trevor. And that's where my frustration comes down to. And where I start to get into some of this lazy analysis is you're not even trying to hide your bias anymore. That's my issue with a lot of this, Trev, is you're not even remotely trying to hide your bias. I'm going to pull up a couple of these rankings here real quick and get into why some of these bother me the way that they do. And I'm going to actually try to find the Andy Staples one because I want to bring up him since he is someone who was higher on Notre Dame than a lot of other people. He has them number 2, but even his number 1 team, again, it fits into why is this team being given love and Notre Dame isn't. Let's talk first and foremost with Texas. When you look at the 4 teams in the Final Four last year, Ohio State, Texas, Penn State, Notre Dame, Ohio State clearly lost the most. Texas lost the second most, and it's not even close how when you talk about what Texas lost compared to what Notre Dame lost.
Yeah.
And so when you look at Texas, well, nobody says like, well, Arch Manning's only started 2 games in his career. One of those was against a team that wasn't a Power 5 team, and he looked great. And against the team that wasn't the Power 5, he didn't look very good. He went 15 of 29 it's the other way around. He looked really good against the Power 5 team he played, who stinks, who's terrible, who had one of the worst defenses in college football. Looked great. 325 yards, 2 touchdowns, no picks against Mississippi State. Against Louisiana Monroe, he completes 51.7% of his passes, throws 2 touchdowns, gets picked off twice. Like, okay, I'm not stressing about that because I actually am someone who thinks Arch is good, but Arch Manning threw 90 passes last year. And it's just assumed he's going to be a great player this year. Now, I'm not one of those Arch is overrated, he's terrible. I think he's overrated in the people saying he's the best returning quarterback in college football. That's nonsense. That's over, but he's in certainly my top 15 of just talents and projected. If you talk about projecting, I could totally find projecting him in the top 10. But if his last name wasn't Manning, you wouldn't have him there. And that's the whole basis for what you're going with Texas. Why is nobody talking about this Texas team saying like, hey, they got some pretty important players they got to replace? Like, I have yet to see an analysis, Trev, that they've talked about the fact that they lost 2 first-round draft picks this past – it was 3 first-round draft picks? I think it was Janae Barron and Kelvin Banks for sure. No, 3. Matthew Golden also. They also lost him. You lost 3 first-round draft picks. You lost both of your starting defensive tackles. You lost 4 starting offensive linemen. You could say 3 because one of the guys that's coming back did play some last year because of injury. That's fair. I'll give you that. Lost like I said, your best cornerback, and all they talk about is Arch Manning and what they have coming back. No mention of, hey, this team's got to completely rebuild their offensive line. Here's what I get down to, and here's what ticks me off about this. And Archer, with all due respect, man, I don't really want to hear the spin of, well, number 7's still really good, blah, 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 blah. Just not today, brother. Just not today. Okay? Because it's not just about the ranking. It's the why. But here's my frustration. How are you going to why is Texas getting this benefit of the doubt? What have they proven? They got to the playoffs twice. They got beat by Washington in the semifinals 2 years ago. They beat Clemson, solid win, and then in the second round needed overtime to beat Arizona State, and then got beat by Ohio State in a game where Ohio State didn't even play very well. And they got beat by Ohio State. And they got beat twice by Georgia last year, neither time in Athens. They got beat at home by Georgia by 15, and then blew a second-half lead to Georgia in the SEC title game, in a game where Georgia's starting quarterback got knocked out at halftime, and you still lost. What has Texas done to earn this assume that they're going to be good status? And that's why I say, like, I wanted to bring up Andy Staples because he has Notre Dame where I have Notre Dame. He has Notre Dame where you have Notre Dame, number 2. But he's got Texas number 1. Why? Why are we assuming that Texas is better than Notre Dame? They weren't better than Notre Dame last year. So why are we assuming that they are? That frustrates me. It frustrates me that there's an inconsistent application of analysis for Texas. Why is Penn State getting the benefit of the doubt? What has James Franklin proven to you that Marcus Freeman has not? Number one, he has fewer big game wins than Brian Kelly against teams on his level. His big wins were over what? SMU and Boise State? What other big win does he have? He's never beaten Michigan when they were good. He didn't beat Oregon last year. He hasn't beaten Ohio State since what, 2016? What? Oh, and by the way, he played Notre Dame last year and got beat by Marcus Freeman in the national semifinals. Well, they didn't lose a whole lot. Neither did Notre Dame. And here's my point. Notre Dame lost Xavier Watts and Riley Leonard. Penn State lost Tyler Warren and Abdul Carter. Well, when Riley Leonard got knocked out, Notre Dame's backup quarterback came in the game, led him on a field goal drive. Xavier Watts obviously had a good game. But I would argue that, with all due respect to Xavier Watts and Riley Leonard, Abdul Carter and Tyler Warren had a far bigger impact on Penn State's success in that particular game than what those two guys did for Notre Dame. Notre Dame's third highest guy drafted in this draft, Notre Dame's first and third highest picked players in the last draft did not play against Penn State last year. Benjamin Morrison and Riley Mills did not play in that game. Penn State had 2 top 15 draft picks. And all they talk about, though, is what they have coming back. There's no mention of, hey, they lost 2 guys that were arguably the best players in their position last year in college football. And ESPN has them number 1. And so it's like, if you want to tell me, Trev, Notre Dame has to prove something, fair. What has Penn State proven? Why are they getting the benefit of the doubt when Notre Dame is not? It's not like Notre Dame lost a lot from last year's team. It's because they're assuming that Penn State's going to reload. They're not assuming Notre Dame will. Well, Penn State is a starting returning quarterback. All right, cool. What about Texas? They don't have a starting returning quarterback. Yeah, but Arch just played a little bit. Okay, but that's not a starting quarterback. That's a guy that's made 2 starts against bad teams. So the biggest thing for me, Trev, to start with this whole thing, even before we saw the ESPN ranking was, and I'm going to get specific I'm going to tear the ESPN specifically ranking apart, but we're seeing this with a lot of these things is, ESPN has Penn State 1 and has Texas 3. USA Today Sports has Texas 3, Penn State 2. Ohio State number 1. I have no problem with anybody that wants to put Ohio State number 1. I have Ohio State number 1. And then CBS Sports has Texas 2, Penn State 3. Why? Make your case for why those teams should be ranked ahead of Notre Dame when Notre Dame was a better team than both of them last year in every way possible. So the common opponents between the two, I believe they had 3 common opponents last year. Notre Dame and Texas both lost to Ohio State. Okay. Notre Dame beat Georgia by 13. Texas lost to them twice. And they both beat Texas A&M by 10 at Texas A&M. So what's your case for saying I'm going to give Texas the benefit of the doubt, but not Notre Dame? What's your reasoning for it? Other than, well, we're just going to hype up the Manning. Like, they lost more starters. Well, yeah, but they got a better offense. Do they? Do they have a better offense than Notre Dame? Because here's what I know. Notre Dame averaged more points per game and yards per play than Texas did last year. For a team that couldn't throw, what everybody says, couldn't throw. Team that lost how many starters on the offensive line last season? Team that didn't have a single starting receiver that was a veteran that all went undrafted. The 3 transfer receivers they got last year all went undrafted. But yet Notre Dame still scored over 3 more points per game and averaged more yards per play. Notre Dame went 2-1 against the schedule that Georgia went 1-4 against. They played the same 3 teams, 1-3 against. Georgia played one of those teams twice. Notre Dame went 2-1 against that schedule. Both wins were by double digits. Texas went 1-3. All 3 losses were by double digits. The 1 win was by 10. So what's the reasoning? What's the reasoning? What's the justification for having Penn State ahead of Notre Dame? I got a quarterback come back. All right, what else? Good offensive line. Well, so's Notre Dame. Who's got better weapons? I mean, because you could say the best thing about Penn State's their running backs, and Notre Dame's like, well, I'll see your running backs. I'll match those. Let's talk pass catchers. You're bringing a bunch of transfers. We're bringing back the guy that torched you in the semifinals. And we're adding Malachi Fields. And wait till you get a load of number 9 this season. Defensively, well, you lost Benjamin Morrison and Xavier Watson and Riley Mills. Only one of those dudes played against Penn State. You lost Jack Kaiser. Okay. He didn't play very well against Penn State. So what are we doing here, Trev? What are we doing here? What's the justification? They had a better portal class. They needed a better portal class. And I would also debate whether they actually had a better portal class. So I just get kind of, I'll be honest with you, a little bit pissed off about this stuff, man, because I see these people and I understand Joel Klatt doing it. I'm not even mad at Joel Klatt for doing it because Joel Klatt's made it very clear, dude, I work for Fox. I'm going to always hype up the teams that Fox has. I'm going to hype up the Big Ten. So when he puts Penn State number 1, whatever. I expect that. He has Notre Dame number 6. And honestly, yeah. I even somewhat understand Oregon being ahead of Notre Dame, although I really strongly disagree with it. Simply because you could say, well, they had a great regular season. They just had that bad day against Ohio State, which is the argument that people made, Trevor. You and I talked about that beforehand. But I would say, but Oregon lost a lot off last year's team. They're having to rely on portal teams. Here's my question, Trev. When I look at Texas, they talk about all the portal pickups they have, and Oregon and LSU and all the portal pickups they have. Who's the team that competed for a championship last year that had a roster that was as heavily dependent on portal players as what Oregon, LSU, and Texas are dependent upon this year? Who's that team? Texas relied on the portal last year, but not nearly as heavily as they are this year.
Yeah,
every team gets portal pickups, but Ohio State, Penn State, and Notre Dame all targeted. We need a quarterback. We need a depth at running back. We need a safety. We need a center. That's it. That's what they got out of the portal this past year. Wasn't a big number. They can go out and buy 20 players out of the portal. They got like 7 or 8. So if you want to go off evidence, then show me the evidence of teams that are competing for titles that rebuild their rosters through the portal. Show me the team that went out and got 20 portal players and is contending for a title like people are now saying LSU will, and Oregon will, and Texas will. Show me. Show me. You can't.
Oh, that's a good point. I do have a question. Are you more, from it sounds like you're more understanding of Oregon being ahead of Notre Dame than Penn State?
No, I'm understanding of just Oregon being ahead of them, period.
Okay.
Like, I can understand why they get the hype. They beat Penn State last year also. Beat them more convincingly than Notre Dame did.
Sure.
They went 13-0. They beat Ohio State in the regular season. What I'm saying is you could chalk their game up to Ohio State as they had a bad day in the Rose Bowl. I'm not saying I buy it. I think that's more indicative of who Dan Lanning has been in big games out of his conference and on the big stage against, in teams not named Liberty.
Sure.
It's more so I don't agree with it, but at least there you have a team that beat Penn State soundly. I mean, Penn State battled. We respected how Penn State played that game, but they never had a shot to win that game. At no point in time they were like, Penn State might win. They kept scoring to make it a 10, 11-point game. It was never like, dude, they're one stop away from taking the lead of this game. So I don't agree with it, but at least there I can say 13-0. They were the number 1 seed. They beat Penn State in the Big Ten title game far more convincingly. They were never down to Penn State 10-0 like Notre Dame was. That's my point. Whereas Penn State, they lost to Penn State played 3 teams last year that were on their level talent-wise, and they went 0-3 in those games. Now, unlike past Penn State teams, this team actually competed against those 3 teams. Like, they were in those 3 games. But they still lost to Ohio State at home, and then they lost to Notre Dame and Oregon on a neutral field. At least Oregon can say, hey, we beat Ohio State. We beat Penn State. Ohio State needed a rematch to beat us. Okay. It's not convincing to me from my ranking standpoint, but if Oregon had the same amount of players coming back to their team as Notre Dame does, I might rank Oregon ahead of Notre Dame. Because on Notre Dame played better against Oregon in the postseason, but Oregon, again, has that win over Ohio State. But because of what they lost, I have an issue with it. So, but I at least can understand it. I'm trying to be, it's not, so it's a thing where just because I don't agree with you doesn't mean that you're wrong in your analysis and I'm going to tear it apart. We just don't see it the same way. Like Georgia, I would not rank Georgia ahead of Notre Dame. There's nothing about these teams right now as they're currently constructed that should make anyone think that Georgia's a better football team than Notre Dame. Notre Dame beat them head-to-head last year without Riley Mills, without Benjamin Morrison, and with a banged-up Rocco Spindler, and without Charles Jagasol, and an injured Jeremiah Love. And Notre Dame lost way less from their team than what Georgia lost. Mm-hmm. Well, but they went out and got Zechariah Branch and Noah Thomas. Interesting you mentioned those two names because I'm pretty sure Notre Dame played against both of those guys last year and won both of those games by double figures on the road. So why am I moved by those guys? What did either one of those guys do against Notre Dame last year? Nada. Nothing. So it just kind of goes down to this notion of, Trev, where, but with Georgia, however, I can say their track record is going to give them some understandable benefit of the doubt. When your down season is we won the SEC title and still went to the playoffs in our worst year in 5 years, yeah, you're a pretty good program. A team that 2 years ago was 13-1 against a weak schedule, and the 2 years before that won a title, I get it. I don't agree with it because it's about this team. And as Rick Pitino said, Todd Monken ain't walking through that door. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I can see Georgia. I don't agree with it, but I can see it. I'm not going to beef with that one. All I'll say is I have Georgia behind me, Notre Dame in mine, but I get it. Kirby Smart has earned the benefit of the doubt. Ryan Day has now earned the benefit of the doubt by just consistently every year being a top 5 team, and then last year going out and winning a championship and beating the number 1 team in the country, Oregon, by 20, beating Texas, who was the SEC regular season champ, and beating Notre Dame, who was knocked all those other teams off, and they beat Penn State. So, like, there's reasons to say, even though if you were to ask me if Notre Dame and Ohio State were playing in the opener on a neutral field, who'd you pick to win? Notre Dame comfortably because Ohio State's losing so much. I don't know that I would feel that they would win as comfortably in game 12 when Ohio State's new starters get a lot more experience. But again, I'm a champ till somebody beats you. And Ryan Day earned that benefit of the doubt by winning the title last year. James Franklin hasn't done that, Trev. Dan Lanning hasn't done that. Steve Sarkisian hasn't done that. We'll talk more specifically about that in the next segment. But that's my frustration with a lot of this, Trev, is just the inconsistency with which they do it. But again, this is why Notre Dame has to go out there this year and say, like, if I'm Marcus Freeman, I'm like, oh, yes. Please down in the rankings. Like, this is awesome because I'm like, look at this disrespect. I hope they're getting as fired up as I am and kind of saying, like, this is why they still don't respect you guys. CJ Kenny, they don't think y'all can ball. Like, they don't think much. ESPN didn't even think enough of you, Jeremiah and Leonard Moore, to even list you in the breakdown. And Leonard, they didn't even list you among the top returning players coming back to Notre Dame. I'm using this like, oh my goodness, I'm using this. Because it is beyond just analysis that I don't agree with, and it's to the disrespect point with some of these. There's a team that finished the year unranked that's ahead of Notre Dame in at least 2 of these rankings, and that would be LSU, who's ranked ahead of Notre Dame according to USA Today and is ranked ahead of Notre Dame in ESPN. And it's not that they moved LSU up because of all the portal pickups. ESPN LSU number 6 in the postseason, top 25, way too early, and they have them number 6 now. They dropped Notre Dame. And that kind of fired me up a little bit. So we're going to talk about the ESPN one next, Trev, but I just wanted to get this part out. But to the point, how do you crush all this noise? How do you silence all this noise? Go out there and repeat this year what you did last year.
Yep.
Simple as that. Go down to Coral Gables in week 1 and handle your business. When that SEC team comes to your place 2 weeks later, and it's not just Notre Dame. I think there's some very lazy analysis going on with Texas A&M right now too.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just Notre Dame. We cover Notre Dame, so we're going to talk about it. But there's some other teams that are like, wait a minute, what? You have Texas Tech in the top 20, but not Texas A&M, but A&M's not even in your top 25? Seriously? What are you smoking? And that's something that's a common theme on that, Trev. So it's not just Notre Dame that's getting disrespected. Now, I think it's not a coincidence that the team that Notre Dame plays from the SEC in week 3 is getting preseason no love, and then they start winning after Notre Dame. You'll see their ranking go up, and they'll get the whole, well, they're a better team now than the one that played Notre Dame beat. Remember when they tried that last year, and LSU A&M was like, yeah, we're going to go ahead and lose our last 4 of our last 5 and remind everybody that we actually aren't that good.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, no, you're right. Well, then let's do it, man. Let's dive right into the ESPN ranking specifically, because that one came out this morning. Brian texted it over to me, and I took a look at initially just where the rankings were and had my initial thoughts. But then what was really unsettling and what really set us off was the justification for where each team was. It was the little blurbs put in for each team and why they were where they were. And it was very noticeable that in all of Notre Dame's description, it was just about the defectors, which are things that could be said about all the other teams that were ranked ahead of or below Notre Dame. But for whatever reason, for the team up in South Bend, that was the only thing that was focused on, is what they lost.
Yeah. That frustrated me, Trev, because you look at Texas, for example, who they have number 3. And they say Texas brought in, wait a minute, where's the one for the offensive line? They say the Longhorns will have to replace 4 starting offensive linemen. And then they start talking about the guys coming back. Trevor Goosby's working at left tackle. Cole Hudson moved to center in the spring. Right guard DJ Campbell also had a great spring. So 4 starters lost, and they're spinning it into, but they're going to be okay. That's what it comes down to. And then Texas lost top 3 pass catchers from 2024 are also gone. There are still good options in Ryan Wingo, DeAndre Moore, and Emmett Mosley Jr., who, by the way, had fewer catches last year than Malachi Fields and Jaden Greathouse. Just want to point that out, by the way. And then it talks about, like, on defense, they talk about who they got coming back. And then Texas brought in 5 defensive line transfers. Not one mention of the fact that they did that because they lost a bunch of guys from their defensive line last year. Georgia, same thing. It's the additions of Thomas and Branch from the transfer portal. Thanks to the additions of Thomas and Branch from the transfer portal, Georgia's receiving core, which was a problem area in 2024, might actually be a strength in 2025. Nothing like that. I mean, they mentioned that Notre Dame got new transfers, but it doesn't really say a whole lot about it. It says this: Freeman dipped into this portal for some help at wideout in Fields and Pauling. I just want to point out that last year, Noah Thomas had 574 yards and Zechariah Branch had 503 yards. Neither one of them were within 200 yards of Malachi Fields. They were barely ahead of Will Pauling in a year where Will Pauling had a down season because of injuries. Neither of them outperformed Jaden Greathouse last season. So explain to me, Trev, how those 2 guys should somehow make Georgia's receiving position a strength, but Notre Dame adding Malachi Fields and Will Pauling is just help to Jaden Greathouse, Jordan Faison, and that group. They didn't even mention Jeremiah Love in the running backs. Didn't even mention it. Penn State's the number 1 team in the country, right, in the ESPN rankings. And Notre Dame can literally say our best is as good as your best. And the whole thing is talking about the portal additions. Oh, here, actually, it's the very beginning. With Aller, Allen, and Singleton returning, Penn State should have one of the most balanced offenses in the FBS. Adding Pena, Ross, and Hudson was critical. Penn State receivers didn't have a reception, and they lost to Notre Dame in the CFP semifinal. They wrote that. Didn't mention that, like, the two corners that locked them down are both coming back for Notre Dame. Pena, slot and receiver, had 84 catches for 941 yards last year, which is basically meant he had the same season that Will Pauling had 2 years ago. So it's just like the whole thing is built around the positives. The only team that they focus on negatives was Ohio State. But here's the best part. So this is what they said about LSU, who lost 4 starters on the offensive line. They say Moore and Thompson should help shore up an offensive line that lost 4 starters. This is what they said about Notre Dame's offensive line. Notre Dame's offensive line depth took a hit when 3 contributors, center Pat Coogan, guard Rocco Spindler, and guard Sam Pendleton, transferred. That's it. Why did they transfer? Because they weren't going to start. I would love to have had Pat Coogan, Sam Pendleton, and Rocco Spindler back. Like I was talking about this with Tim O'Malley before the show, because when he saw my tweet, he's like, okay, why are you pissed? Because I told him why. And it's like, I would rather have Rocco on the team in case there's an injury again. But you're talking about these transfers from another school are going to shore up LSU's offensive line, which wasn't as good as Notre Dame's last year, by the way, and had the number 4 overall draft pick and still wasn't as good as Notre Dame's offensive line was last year, lost 4 starters. And you're not going to mention the fact that Notre Dame returns how many guys that started? Emil Wagner, Billy Schrauth, Anthony Knapp, Ashton Craig, Charles Jagasaw, all started games last year. You're not going to mention that? They get no, oh, by the way, redshirt sophomore Charles Jagasaw is already getting projections into the first round of the NFL draft by people. Pro Football Focus ranks Emil Wagner as one of the 5 best returning tackles or 10 best returning tackles in college football next year. No, they mentioned 3 guys that weren't going to start. Here's my favorite part, Trev. Well, so that's something that bothered me. LSU had a worse line than Notre Dame last year, lost more from that line, including the number 4 overall pick, and you just brush that off because they got a couple transfers. And you're going to ignore the fact that, and then you're going to focus on Notre Dame's 3 losses are guys that weren't even going to freaking start. Tell me you don't know what you're talking about, or tell me you don't have some sort of bias about Notre Dame. Again, not I hate Notre Dame, but Notre Dame doesn't reload like insert team does. Like that's what frustrates me. But here's my favorite part, because I want to finish the Notre Dame part, and then we're going to talk about how in the world do you have these 2 teams ahead of Notre Dame. The quarterback. Tell me what you guys think of this statement. The biggest development from the spring was quarterback Steve Angeli's departure to Syracuse. He backed up former starter Riley Leonard during the Fighting Irish's run to the college football playoff national title game. That leaves freshman CJ Carr and sophomore Kenny Minchey competing for the job. That sounds like he is the way he wrote that, and he's a veteran sports writer, someone who I respect as a writer. That comes across as Steve Angeli was going to start, and he just up and left for Syracuse, leaving behind these 2 guys to now compete for the job. As opposed to CJ Carr and Kenny Minchey beat out Steve Angeli, who did what he did last year. Maybe these guys are pretty flipping good. No, it's Steve Angeli left. As if it's somehow we think less of Notre Dame now because Steve Angeli left, who got beat out by the 2 guys still there. That's literally the primary focus of what they talked about. They talked about Devontae Smith, a cornerback from Alabama, was working as the first-team nickelback during spring practice. Nothing on Leonard Moore. Leonard Moore's name is not even mentioned in the top returning players. A guy that another ESPN writer ranked as the number 2 returning defensive back in the entire country doesn't even get mentioned as a top returning player. He mentions Adon Schuler in the list, but he never talks about him in the breakdown. What is the positive that they talked about? They also mentioned Chris Ash filling in for Al Golden. The only positive is they're getting help from Malachi Fields and Will Pauling. But you spend 2 paragraphs talking about why LSU, a team that was unranked at the end of the year last year, is now going to be 6th. A team who had the same record as Marcus Freeman in year 2 when they had Jaden Daniels, Malik Neighbors, and Brian Thomas. And where did Mason Taylor get picked? Wasn't he a second-round pick this year? That team had the same number of wins as Marcus Freeman's year 2 team that lost to Louisville and Clemson. Same record. And then they've gone in his 3 years, they've gone down all 3 years. SEC title game in year 1, 10-3, no SEC title game in year 2 with Jaden Daniels, Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas, Mason Taylor, and then in year 3, 9-4. And they're going to be a team ranked ahead of Notre Dame. And it wasn't just them. USA Today did the same thing. And it's all built around the portal. This is what he says. There's no reason the Tigers shouldn't be in the thick of the SEC title and CFP races after Coach Brian Kelly added 18 players in the transfer portal, including several plug-and-play starters. Again, name me the team that made a run at the national title last year with a roster rebuilt with portal guys. Isn't this the same reason all of y'all hyped up Texas A&M last year? It's because all the portal guys they got and that great D-line they had, which was made up of a couple portal guys also. Isn't this the reason you guys all picked A&M to beat Notre Dame last year because of all the portal pickups they had? How'd that work out? How'd it work out for Ole Miss, who you guys hyped up last year because of all their portal pickups? How'd that work out? Name me the team that just rebuilt through the portal that much that went out here this past year and made a run at the title. I'll wait. But we're just going to assume with no evidence that a coach who couldn't even get to the SEC title game with Jaden Daniels, Brian Thomas, Malik Neighbors, Mason Taylor is somehow going to now do that, and we're predicting he's going to do that and rank them ahead of Notre Dame and Oregon, by the way. He also has them ahead of Oregon and Alabama. Why? Why? Because they got portal pickups? Really? Okay.
It's bad.
What's funny is the only team that he had success with was the team that all the LSU fans kept telling us, well, this is a rebuilding year because of the roster he got left behind.
That's a fair point. No, it's definitely a fair point. When we break down these lists, there are a couple of teams where there are some glaring holes as to why they are consistently ranked ahead of Notre Dame. And it's almost in every single list. Actually, the only list that didn't put Oregon ahead of Notre Dame was ESPN's. The ESPN had Oregon ranked 8th. Yeah. And they had Notre Dame ranked 7th.
Andy Staples, for his, also had Notre Dame ahead of Oregon. But It's not a network one. It was just kind of his thing. There's like multiple people did one for On 3.
So when we look, the next couple teams that we're going to talk about here, Brian, are Texas and Oregon, 2 teams that are relatively consistently ranked ahead of.
Before we move on, I've done a lot of ranting today. I want to get your thoughts on what he said about Notre Dame.
Well, it's just clear that they're sticking with the narrative. And I know that we're going to kind of break down what is that narrative specifically, but it's Notre Dame for the last, really at the start of 2017, Notre Dame, with the exception of maybe 2021, Notre Dame was coined as this team that had a stout defense and a great run game. But the second that they played against a team that could defend the run, they couldn't do anything because apparently every quarterback that Notre Dame has had since Deshaun Kaiser and Malik Zaire left throw with their non-dominant hand. That's the issue with me, is that's what they're sticking with. I think the reason why Steve Angeli made a lot of news of why he left is because he has been what the staple Notre Dame quarterback has been consistently. Riley Leonard was the caveat. Steve Angeli played second fiddle to him too. But Steve fit the narrative of what people believe a Notre Dame quarterback is. a gritty guy, a Notre Dame guy, limited athletically, might shy away in the big moments, don't know how he's going to react. I mean, people were so blown away by one drive where he led a field goal drive where he went 6 of 7 for 42 yards, and people said, could he be like Joe Burrow? That's what people think of the Notre Dame quarterback room, is that you just see any glimmer of, hey, this guy can actually throw. Could he be Joe Burrow? That's what the national media thinks of Notre Dame's quarterback room, which is why it doesn't surprise me in this ESPN article. They're downplaying. It's like, well, I guess now they're going to have to go with freshman CJ Carr or sophomore Kenny Minchey. And they're not even going to mention the fact that they're not even going to be a freshman and a sophomore in the fall.
Yeah.
But it sounds worse.
Yeah.
If they would have said now they have to choose between sophomore CJ Carr, junior Kenny Minchey, I don't think people would be like, oh my goodness. But now,
do you really think, like, in your head, if you're there, that Steve Angeli just up and left Notre Dame to go to Syracuse for any reason other than he got beat out? Like, and shouldn't that tell you something?
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's why I use the word lazy a lot. And that's what it is. It's lazy. You heard all this talk about Steve Angeli. You bought the lazy narratives. You did no homework for yourself. And all you know about CJ Carr is that he's Lloyd Carr's grandson, because he mentions that in the article. Mm. And you didn't stop to think for a second, well, why did these guys leave Notre Dame for Syracuse, Indiana, Nebraska, and Tennessee? The only one you can even think of is Tennessee, and say, well, that's an SEC school that'll spend some money. Maybe. You really think Pat Coogan left Notre Dame for Indiana because of what? NIL? He was going to start at Notre Dame, but Indiana's giving him a big old paycheck. And Rocco Spindler left for Nebraska because Notre Dame paid him off, because they paid him off. Even some Notre Dame fans think that. It's not true. It's not true. If it isn't. You think Steve Angeli went to Syracuse because he just didn't want to start at Notre Dame and throw to the guys he's going to throw to next year? Like, that's what went through your head? Because that's what you wrote. That's literally what you wrote. They're left with these two players because Steve Angeli up and left. Mm-hmm. The big story from the spring is that Steve Angeli got outperformed so thoroughly by these two kids that he up and left. And it's not because he didn't play his best football. Steve Angeli did his best this spring, and he battled his butt off this spring. But he's not in the same league as CJ Carr and Kenny Minchey, and we've been telling you all that for a year. So it's very frustrating, Trev. It's just the way it's written. It's like, you didn't say that about other quarterbacks on the list. Why do these guys get that treatment? And it's just really frustrating.
Well, I think the thing that bothers me too, talking big picture real quick before we move on, is I think there's a couple of trains of thought when people put together just pre-season this, post-spring this. I don't put as much weight into what teams did the year before in comparison to what other people did, because the same story could be said for a lot of other teams. It's like, well, Notre Dame, they went to the national championship. Agreed. CJ Carr didn't. Kenny Minchey didn't, but Riley Leonard did. Notre Dame's defense. Notre Dame's defense had a safety that had 6 picks. It's like, agreed, he's gone. So there is truth to that. But what bothers me is that narrative isn't the same for the other teams, that you also have to project how good they are going to be. That is my issue too.
Correct. Arch Manning didn't go to the national championship or semifinals last year.
Exactly.
Ja'Day Barron, their best DB's gone.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It's not being applied. You're saying it's not being applied consistently.
Mm-hmm.
Like if they wanted to have Penn State number 1 and they wanted to have LSU number 2, and I'm just trying to find some teams with returning starting quarterbacks because they've got proven quarterbacks. I'm like, fine. Clemson number 2, LSU number 3. There'd be some level of consistency there.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't sit there and say you're going to rank these teams because they got their quarterbacks coming back, even though they both lost 4 games last year, ahead of this team because they lost their quarterback. And they're not even upset about Riley Leonard being gone. They're talking about Steve Angeli being gone.
Yep. And that's what bothers me. I would have understood if it was in that light. That is part of the reason why I do have Penn State where I have them in my rankings.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's an argument to be made both sides. I even said, look, if I don't work for Irish Breakdown, Notre Dame is probably my number one team because I think that they have the most
learn to
complete
just
roster in the
say,
country.
screw it, I'm going to do what I want to do anyway. But I get you in year one why you're hesitant to just go full homer, or you're concerned about the perception of going full homer. I get that and respect it.
And so when I look at Penn State, I look at it through that lens of, okay, there's a lot of teams that say, well, Texas made it to the semifinals last year. It's like, yes, and they did it with an NFL drafted left tackle. They did it with a first round wide receiver. They did it with Arch Manning. They did it. I'm listing all players that they don't have anymore. But for Penn State, it's like, hey, they made it to national semifinals with Drew Aller and Katron Allen and Nicholas Singleton and Andy Kotelnicki. And their defensive coordinator went farther than they did. And so if you look at it through that lens with everybody, I can understand why some people have it where it is. I'm sympathetic to Penn State being number one because I have Notre Dame number two. I can't see it in my mind where Penn State's number one and Notre Dame is seventh.
Notre Dame's closer in their rankings to Illinois than they are Penn State.
Mm-hmm.
And Clemson. That's my issue. I even answered that for you, Trevor, in the mail in the Bison hold. I said, listen, I'm going to answer this for Trevor because obviously Trevor's going to explain it. But let me, as someone who doesn't have Penn State ahead of Notre Dame, let me make the case. You can make the case. But if you're going to talk about how much Penn State has coming back and how they went to they didn't even really point to that, though. They pointed to their portal pickups at receiver and getting Jim Knowles. No mention that Chris Ash, here's the funny thing. They talk about for Clemson, the big thing they talk about with Clemson is, it says Clemson coach Dabo Swinney also made a big move to shore up his defense, which ranked next to last in the ACC in stopping the run, luring defensive coordinator Tom Allen away from Penn State. And then they talk about Jim Knowles, obviously being a great big hire for Penn State, which he was. With Chris Ash, no mention that, national championship winning defensive coordinator Chris Ash. No, it's like he's got to replace Al Golden. And it's just kind of like, I don't know that Chris Ash is a better D coordinator than Tom Allen. They don't either, but I know that he's had some he's got a national championship ring.
Yeah, sure does.
So
he sure does.
It's you're correct. It's the lack of consistency.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to hype up LSU, but then drop Bama to 9.
Mm-hmm.
Explain that to me.
I'm okay if somebody wants to use projection, but use it for every team because you have to some
consistency.
Degree. I'm projecting with Notre Dame with some of these players. Now, a lot of it is a little bit stronger of foundation because I've been to practices. I've seen what this is supposed to look like. I've seen what it's also not supposed to look like. Gives me a lot of confidence. Whereas I haven't been at a Penn State practice. I haven't been at an Ohio State practice. But if you're going to use projection with a lot of these teams, it has to be consistent throughout the list. But for Notre Dame, there was no projection in that list. It was just defactors. There was no projection of how good CJ Carr would be. There was no projection of how good Chris Ash would be as the defensive coordinator. There's no projection on how good the offensive line would be. It was just, hey, this is who they lost. And
no mention of they might have the best backfield in college football coming back. We ranked Jeremiah Love as the number one running back in college football, ESPN, we do. And by the way, we also rank Leonard Moore as the number 2 defensive back in the country behind Caleb Downs.
Mm-hmm.
And they talk about, they talked about Caleb Downs.
Well, and if you are going to just list the departures, for example, they said Steve Angeli leaves, I guess behind him, he got a freshman and a sophomore.
Yeah.
Why would you not then also talk about what the offensive line has left?
Right.
Oh, it's because they've started to combine 50 games. That's why you don't talk about it.
Yeah.
It's just, there's inconsistencies even within what they talk about for Notre Dame. Well,
it's like you look at even little things like this. Like when they talk about Ohio State number 5, they had them number 1 in the post-spring or in the postseason way too early top 25. What's the reasoning for dropping Ohio State down to 5? What if you thought after the season that they'd be number 1? Why are they dropped to number 5? But in there, when it talks about key players returning, they list 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 guys. They list 2 offensive linemen that were not full-year starters, Luke Montgomery and Carson Hinsman. They list Arvell Reese, who did not start last year. They list Jermaine Matthews, who did not start last year. They list Brandon Innes. Do you know who they don't list for Notre Dame? Leonard Moore, Christian Gray, any of their defensive linemen, like none of them. You'd think Notre Dame lost their entire defense. You're going to list Arvell Reese, who, by the way, for those who may have never listened to us talk about Arvell Reese before, he is a guy that I have pointed to as someone who I think they're going to be okay losing Cody Simon because of Arvell Reese. My issue is not including Arvell Reese as your returners. If anything, he's something you point to say, hey, look, this guy's a good football player. I think they're going to be okay because he's coming back. Totally fine with that. But then why not mention Kingston Viliama-Asa or Jaden Ausberry or Jalen Sneed for Notre Dame? Jaden Ausberry stepping in for Jack Kaiser if he ends up starting, and he made him start. Jaden Ausberry last year was tied for second on the defense in tackles for loss. Tied for second and didn't start. He doesn't get a mention as a returner, but they're going to put a couple offensive linemen that didn't even start half the year. They're going to put Arvell Reese in there, but not Kingston or Jaden Ausberry or even Leonard Moore. They literally did not mention Leonard Moore as a key returner, but Carson Hinsman and Luke Montgomery and Arvell Reese and Brandon Innes and Jermaine Matthews are listed. You listed their backup corner from last year, but who, by the way, is one of two players that Jaden Greathouse smoked on his first touchdown, beat him off the line, made Caleb Downs miss in space. But you're not going to mention Leonard Moore, the guy that your organization ranks as the number 2 returning DB in the country behind Caleb Downs? Seriously? Really? So that's what we're talking about. It's you can tell this cat did zero homework on Notre Dame. Zero. He looked as like, okay, let me list this is the explanation. Well, I got to list the 2 running backs. I'll go ahead and list their top 2 returning receivers, their leading tacklers, and call it a day. No mention of Josh Burnham. No mention of Bryce Young. No mention of Jaden Ausberry, Jalen Sneed, Kingston Viliama-Asa, Christian Gray, or Leonard Moore, a freshman All-American. They made sure some other guys got named freshman All-Americans.
Not a single player.
They made sure the Texas cat from Syracuse who transferred to Texas, they made sure they talked about him being a freshman All-American, but nothing on Anthony Knapp, nothing on Kingston, who was a freshman All-American, nothing on Leonard Moore, who's a freshman All-American, and will probably be an ESPN preseason All-American. Nothing on them, huh? We're just going to talk about how they lost Pat Coogan, Rocco Spindler, and Sam Pendleton. Okay. Sure, buddy. Sure. But there's no laziness here. There's no Notre Dame bias here. None of that. None of that. We're just, they listed 2 guys from the Georgia secondary who wasn't very good last year. I mean, they literally mentioned more guys from LSU's defense than Notre Dame's returning starters on defense. They literally listed 4 guys from on the defense from LSU whose defense was not very good last year, and 2 for Notre Dame, Drake Bowen and Don Schuler. But I'm supposed to believe it's honest, fair analysis. That's my issue. And it's not even that they have Texas ahead of Notre Dame. That's fine. It's the fact that you're not applying the same standard to Texas that you are Notre Dame. That's my issue. Mm-hmm. And it now we talked about LSU being ahead of Notre Dame, Trev, a little bit. That's just ridiculous. How do you have LSU ahead of Alabama? LSU brought in 18 transfers and Alabama didn't. That's because Alabama didn't need 18 transfers because they have cats coming back that were on the team last year. Mm-hmm. And well, yeah, Alabama struggled. They went 9-4 last year. What was LSU's record again? 9-4, I'm pretty sure, right, Trev? Mm-hmm. Correct me. Didn't Alabama and LSU play last year? What was the score of that game, Trev? Wasn't it late in the year? Like 2 weeks before they played Oklahoma? Oh, that's right. 42-13. That's right. I remember now. Well, hey, look, man, Alabama struggled. They lost 2 of their last 3 in the season. So did Clemson. So again, where's the consistency here? How does Alabama, how are they 9th, but LSU is 6th? Well, they have a returning starter quarterback. You can't use that as a reason why, because you've already shown you don't really care about whether teams do or don't have a returning starting quarterback, because you have Texas up high, you have Ohio State up high, you have Oregon ahead of them. They don't have a returning starting quarterback. Their anticipated starting quarterback threw like 45 yards last year off the bench in that system. Alabama didn't go out and get a bunch of portal guys because they didn't need a bunch of portal guys. How are they 9th? Well, Kalen DeBoer's got to prove what? That he can beat Steve Sarkisian head-to-head in the postseason like he did 2 years ago? That he can beat Dan Lanning like he did twice 2 years ago and once the year before that? What's the reason that there's just no so again, it's not just Notre Dame. It's laziness overall. We're focusing on the Notre Dame part because we're a Notre Dame show. But if I'm a Bama person, I'm looking at this like, hold on a second. You have LSU 3 spots ahead of us? Based on what? We only beat them by 29 last year? Yeah, but you lost Jalen Milroe. Yeah, that's why I think they're going to be even better this year. Because they don't have 2 years ago version of Jalen Milroe. They have last year's version of Jalen Milroe, which is not good. So it's just looking at the whole thing, Trev. You're just like, you got to be kidding me.
All in all, it's just the same rules don't apply for other teams. I'm okay if you want to, if your basis for your preseason rankings, which I'll use mine as an example because I can speak to it. A lot of it is what you have returning and projection. That's what carried a lot of weight in my rankings, and I think it reflects that. And I'd be the first person to tell anybody that. But if that's what you're going to do for certain teams, it has to be that way for other teams. And that's what bothers me the most about all of these lists as a whole. Not even just with Notre Dame. What in the heck has Texas Tech showed you for them to be ranked ahead of Texas A&M? Like, I wanna ask people that have done that. What has IU shown and or not shown? And look, if there's a case to be made about a Cinderella story and a magnificent type of one and done type of season, it's Indiana. And I even have them ranked in my top 10 in my preseason top 10. Like, that would be the program. Like, IU has perennially been a horrible football program, arguably the worst that has ever existed in the FBS. And they made it to the playoffs. So if there is a team that could be deemed that, it's certainly not Notre Dame.
Right.
But then they consistently drop, even though they have a lot coming back on a proven team. So
how do you have Texas Tech number 16, Trevor? How do you have them ahead of Indiana? How do you have Texas Tech ahead of Indiana? How do you have Texas Tech ahead of even Florida? How do you have them ahead of Michigan? How do you have them ahead of Miami, Louisville, Texas A&M, Ole Miss? It makes no sense. They went 8-5 in the Big 12. They got blown out by Washington State, blown out by Baylor. They lost to TCU, got whooped by Colorado, and got smacked by Arkansas in the bowl game. Well, they got a bunch of transfers. Again, show me the team that did that kind of success with transfers. Oh, well, Indiana did. And most of them are coming back. Most of the guys that had success out of the portal for Indiana are back. Their stud receivers back. Their stud D lineman is back, Mikael Kamara. Their 2 stud linebackers are back. They lost the one kid, but the one that's coming back to start with Fisher this year was actually more productive on a per snap basis than the kid that's gone. Pons comes back, who was a stud transfer last year. They're coming back, but the first-year guys from Texas Tech are going to be better than what Indiana has? Are you serious?
And one of the highest-rated players for Texas Tech's portal class left the school in the winter.
Yes, thank you.
What are we doing? Like, at that point, then Notre Dame should just have a bunch of kids enter the winter portal and then come back so they have a top-rated portal class. And then ESPN and 247 and On3 can be like, dude, look at how good this portal class is. I don't understand. I don't understand how somebody who elected to leave your program, went to somebody else, got kicked off the team and didn't make it to spring, comes back to the original school and they're like, dude, Texas Tech just picked up a wicked portal receiver.
Right. He played for you last year and didn't do anything. Like, he was on your team. He was on your team last year. Had 8 catches for 123 yards.
The Texas Tech one blows my mind. I was mad about where Notre Dame was, especially when I saw the teams in front of them. I kept scrolling down and I was like, okay, like Kansas State, they are where we are. And I scrolled too fast and I was like, I think that was a Texas Tech logo. Yeah. And I was like, ain't no way, bro. Yeah. And I scrolled back up and I was like, apparently it is. And then I scrolled down a little bit more and then I saw IU.
Yeah.
And then I saw IU.
And Miami's below them. And you're not high on Miami. But you can't sit there and be like, well, because of portal pickups, they're going to be good. But did Miami get a bunch of portal pickups too?
How did Oklahoma make it in the top 25?
But Navy's not? I mean, okay, Oklahoma. What we're seeing is they're putting way too much emphasis on the portal with no evidence. So, like, this comes down to the ultimate lack of consistency. You're going to overhype teams that have unproven rosters that had to go to the portal for – I mean, LSU brought in 18 portal pickups. That's almost an entire starting lineup. And we're going to give them the benefit of the doubt for a team that has not played well together and a team that was 9-4 and unranked last year. We're going to assume that they're going to be good, but we're going to rip apart Notre Dame and talk about all the losses they had. Like, we're going to talk about Texas Tech, who went 8-5, and Oklahoma, who went 6-7, and talk about their portal pickups, but then we're not going to do the same thing with Indiana, who got a better portal pickup at quarterback this year than the one they got last year, and brings back most of their stud portal transfers from last year, who were all Big Ten players. Elijah Surratt was an all Big Ten player. D'Angelo Pons was an all Big Ten player. Mikael Kamara was an all Big Ten player. Aiden Fisher was an all Big Ten player. They all come back. And we're going to rank them below Texas Tech, who went 8-5. And I understand why Oklahoma made it in. It's a rhetorical question. John Mateer, they got this pickup, that pickup. But it's unproven players coming to a team that wasn't very good. Here's the school, like Jaden Ott's good pickup. He played on a team that wasn't very good last year also. John Mateer was a talented quarterback. Didn't play on a very good team last year. They're coming to a team that wasn't very good also. So why are they getting the benefit of the doubt when other teams are not?
When you're another team that's ranked ahead of IU that I just can't fathom. You put Iowa State 3 spots above IU. Why? Because they're bringing back Rocco Becht. You lose 2 1,000-yard receivers, and you're replacing them with key portal additions from a guy from East Carolina and Central Florida. And that's who's going to come in and replace your 2,000-yard receivers.
Who are pretty high NFL draft picks, by the way.
That's enough for you to say, I don't care that IU has Omar Cooper Jr. and Elijah Surratt coming back? I don't get it.
Yeah. An Iowa State team that, let's not forget, by the way, got destroyed by Arizona State in the Big 12 title game and gave up 31 points in the first half to Miami in the bowl game before Cam Ward sat out. That team is a preseason top 15 team. Really. Better than Indiana. Better than Florida. Better than Texas A&M. Really? Okay. Trev, you said it to me, and I don't know if you said it during the show. You said it to me when we were talking earlier. So much of this is driven by narrative and not analysis. Mm-hmm. And that's absolutely correct. There's so much. The reason Texas is that high is not because they necessarily have evaluated Arch Manning and think he's great. It's because they're going with the narrative that Arch Manning's going to be good. The narrative about Penn State, the narrative about LSU, because they all jump on the same bandwagons. This is, let's be honest about this, a dirty little secret about media, whether it's local media or national media. They all jump on the same bandwagons. There's some individuals that will kind of step out of that and say, hey, I got my own thing. I'm going to do what I want to do. But a lot of these people, LSU's getting a lot of hype. I don't want to miss out on LSU. These people aren't, hey, They're not throwing Bama up where we think Bama. I don't want to be the guy that goes, off script and goes with that. That's how you see narratives like a bunch of people saying Steve Angeli is going to start a quarterback because they don't want to. It's groupthink. It's why certain teams get hyped up by everybody. It's groupthink. Well, I don't want to rank Notre Dame number 2 and everybody else is getting them like 6 and 7 and 8. I don't want to be the team that does that. You don't have a lot of free thinkers. It's a lot of narrative. It's why you see every year everybody has A&M in the top 10 every year when they didn't deserve it. Now they actually kind of have a team that kind of deserves it, and they're not getting the love.
Right.
It's like it's all narrative driven. Remember when North Carolina was a preseason top 10 team after losing a couple 1,000-yard runners? Remember that?
Sure do.
And everybody just jumped on the same bandwagon. And we were like, what the heck? They weren't even that good last year. It's all narrative driven, but there's the lack of consistency and the lack of real analysis frustrates the heck out of me.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't matter. Yeah, it does matter to a degree, especially now, because the perception of your program is defined by the narratives that are said about you from a national standpoint. And when certain teams are getting overhyped in this era of NIL, that's going to benefit that program more than it will another program in ways that it didn't used to. It didn't used to matter. It was just all perception. And it maybe it impacts you a little bit in recruiting, but recruiting was happening so much later that you wouldn't have to get a chance to go out and prove yourself anyway. But now it's like this guy's getting hyped and this guy's getting hyped. So this guy's getting portal deals and that guy's getting portal deals because they're all talking about how good this team is. This team over here is not getting that same love because they're not. And that it does matter more now than it used to because your perception drives your following, drives your engagements, which leads to, is this guy someone we want to jump in an NIL deal with, a real NIL deal? So it does matter more now than it used to. The narratives do matter more now than they used to.
Well, and the same people that make the argument that strength of schedule matters can also say that preseason rankings don't matter. That's part of it. Like the perception of how good your team is coming into the year matters because you can go back and say, well, hey, back when Team A was ranked this, Notre Dame beat them when they were ranked this. Because if I recall, Texas A&M in September was ranked higher than what they were in November when rankings matter. So it does, like to a degree. I don't
How
put
else
too much
is strength of schedule because everybody talks about what a team's strength of schedule is early in the season and in the offseason.
Yeah.
What's that being formulated off of?
Yeah.
What's that being calculated by? The league you're in and what you did last year.
No, absolutely. I don't think that anybody's putting together lists of Bryan, I can't speak for you, but I feel like we're on the same page here. When I put together my preseason top 25, that is not my order of who I think is most likely going to win the national championship. It's how the team is set up entering the season. I don't look
Correct.
at my list truly and say, yeah, I think Penn State has the best odds to win a national championship this year.
We also don't think they're going to finish 4th in the Big Ten. Like it's a little bit of both, in my opinion. It's more so about the floor than it is the ceiling for phrases that we like to use.
Yeah.
I don't think Penn State's going to win the national title, but I'm also not going to say, Trev, dude, okay. Like when you sent me your ranks out, hey, Trev, you might want to rethink this Penn State number 1 thing, man. That's going to be a bad look for you. No, that's your ranking. I understand where you're coming from. But sit there say, does Texas have a higher floor this year or does Penn State have a higher floor this year than Texas? I would argue yes. I'm more certain that Penn State can make another run back to the Final Four than I am Texas based on what we know right now.
Yeah.
Now, if both teams reach their full potential, that may not be the same. But if you're going to talk about full potential, then you can't then say, well, we're going to ding Notre Dame because they have CJ Carr, who's never played. Well, I thought this was a potential thing. Are we not talking potential anymore? Is that not where we are? Are we not going down that road anymore? Because I thought that's what we were doing. I thought we were talking about that.
Mm-hmm.
Because if we're going to talk about that, then hey, ESPN, where'd you rank CJ Carr coming out of high school? He's the number 36 player in the country. He was your number 36 player. He was your number 2 pocket passing quarterback in the country. On your rankings. But we're going to act like he's just some freshman we've never heard of. Okay. All right. That's how we're going to roll now. All right.
And if
Number
you are
36 player in your rankings is Notre Dame's starting quarterback this year, and he's a redshirt freshman, not a true freshman. We're going to act like that should, hey, this cat is someone we were super high on, and he looks to be ahead of schedule because he played so well that Steve Angeli, who we thought was going to be really good, and who one of our lead college football analysts, who's actually really good, and he is. I'm actually really enjoying listening to Greg McElroy. Don't always agree with him, but you like, this guy's got some reasoning behind it. He's talking about how he could be the next Joe Burrow breakout. He wasn't saying he was going to be Joe Burrow. He wasn't saying he's going to come out and throw for 60. He was making the standpoint of he was somebody that most people had never heard of, and then everybody had heard of him. That's the point he was making. He wasn't saying he's going to be the number 1 overall draft pick, to be fair to what Greg said. But whenever you're throwing that comparison in there, that's meant to have some bite to it. You're trying to make a strong point. That guy got beat out by a kid that you ranked as the number 36 player in the country coming out, borderline 5-star, number 2 pocket passer in your rankings. Beat that guy out. That should be like, hey, maybe CJ Carr's a little ahead of schedule. That's a storyline to sell. You know they do it if they were talking about an SEC team. You know they would. But when it comes to Notre Dame, it's a mention of, okay, he's left. He's the grandson of Lloyd Carr. He seemed to be ahead in the spring. That's literally the extent of their conversation about CJ Carr. That's it.
Well, I think the thing that bothers me the most is that a lot of it is narrative driven, and there is a narrative that just Notre Dame can't pass the ball, and that's why they can. That's what frustrates me the most. You can point to stats, more yards per play, more points per game, but as long as it doesn't look cool and they don't do it throwing the football for whatever reason, it doesn't matter. What bothers me in that light is that people are going to say Notre Dame lost a national championship because they couldn't move the ball, throw the ball in the first half against Ohio State. And then they insert a really top-level pocket passer as their starting quarterback in 2025. But then you're not going to give that any weight. Then pick one.
Yeah. Not even going to – just going to act like he's some afterthought that's a leftover because Steve Angeli just up and left. You know, pulled a Baltimore Colts and just up and moved in the middle of the night to Indianapolis. You know what I mean? Just, oh, my gosh, what are we going to do now? We're left with this kid and this kid. You know, like as if he was going to start, but just really felt like, I want to go closer to home. I'm going to go back to Syracuse. It's like, come on, dude. It's ridiculous. And what's funny is the guy, and Five Adam just kind of mentioned this, the guy that you could actually compare to Joe Burrow on the Notre Dame roster, and I have, is CJ Carr. Stylistically, again, I'm not saying he's going to throw for 5,600 yards and 60 touchdowns and lead one of the greatest offenses ever. I'm making the point, stylistically, he actually fits the kind of player Joe Burrow was. And he's a little ahead of schedule maybe than you thought he was going to be. So, again, it just goes back to the narratives and just the being misinformed. And you'd think when your job is to be a national college football writer, you'd know a little bit more about the team that was the national runners-up last season. You'd think. And that's what frustrates me. It's almost like I almost feel like it's disrespectful to the profession. It's disrespectful to fans to not do better there.
Yeah.
Not own that more. And it's just freaking frustrating. Very frustrating.
So all in all, let's kind of put a bow on this segment here, Bryan, and talk, wrapping this all up. What does Notre Dame have to do to change that narrative? We've talked about it a little bit, but encompassing, what do they have to do?
You need to have success in your first 4 games against 3 teams that either have some prestige or are from the conferences that get the hype. So you get to play Miami, who's a team that ESPN has in their ranking. They have Miami 21st, and they have A&M 23rd. So you do get that chance to play them. You look at the college football or USA Today, they have Miami 10th. I don't think they had Texas A&M in their top 25, which I found absolutely hilarious. That they had, yes, they don't have A&M. They have Oklahoma, TCU, UNLV, Nebraska in their top 25, but not Texas A&M.
Who is this?
This is the USA Today ranking. Yeah, they're post-spring. Post spring, they had Tennessee 14th. This is written on April 28th. And CBS Sports had, they've got Miami 11th. This is the updated one. So they have Miami 11th. This was written on the 5th. They have Miami 11th, and they don't have A&M in their top 25. A&M is like not even their top 30. They're just missed the cuts. Baylor, Boise. They don't have Indiana in the top 25, but they have Auburn. They have Texas Tech. They have Tennessee. They have Oklahoma 18th, Michigan 16th, TCU 15th, but they don't have Indiana in the top 25. Tell me you actually don't know anything about Indiana other than you think there's some Cinderella. Come on. Ridiculous. But they have, let's see, 20, 30, 31, 30. They have A&M 33rd, Ole Miss 32nd. A&M right ahead of UNLV, USC, and Utah. Behind Auburn. So you can say, well, yeah. So to answer your question, Trev, you got to handle business those two games. And at least one of them needs to be a very impressive victory, meaning like you smacked that team pretty good. And I think doing that to Miami, assuming Carson Beck plays, does that. If they beat Miami with no Carson Beck, it won't get any respect. It'll just be, Miami have Carson Beck. But you got to handle your business, and then you've got to get to the playoff, and you've got to make another run. You've got to make noise in the playoffs. And that noise isn't you get Illinois at home in the first round, beat them, and then get to the quarters and get beat by somebody good. Because then that just confirms what they were saying anyway. You've got to make another run. You've got to make another run. You've got to at least get to the semifinals. Because if you get to the semifinals, you've proven we're a top 4 team. Like, no, we're not as better than Ohio State yet because we haven't won a title. And maybe we're not better than Georgia overall. Let's say Georgia gets back to the semifinals next year. Notre Dame doesn't play them. They both get beat. Hey, we beat Georgia in a head-to-head, but overall, big picture, last 5 years, they're still a better program than us. But, and let's say the Final Four this year is like Ohio State, Georgia, Notre Dame, and Texas. And let's say Notre Dame loses to Ohio State, Georgia, or Texas. Say, okay, look, you want to have those three ahead of Notre Dame? Fine. Penn State shouldn't be there anymore. Oregon shouldn't be there anymore. Like you need to make that kind of run. And if you replace Oregon or Texas for Oregon or Georgia for Oregon, like one of those two teams is back in the Final Four, then you take that team that's coming out of there. If Georgia gets beat in the quarterfinals again, then it's time for you to accept the fact that Notre Dame's a better program than Georgia because they've now back-to-back years made deeper runs, or Penn State or whoever. You've got to make another run because before I got pissed off about all this nonsense, LSU ahead of Notre Dame. We didn't even talk about Clemson being number 2 in the ESPN rankings. Like, seriously? Not even going to go there because we'll go on another hour rant. and I am high on Clemson, but 2 is ridiculous. It's like, come on, guys. But the thing is, Trev, is you've got to make that type of run again and shut everybody up. Mm-hmm. Because with what they'll have coming back in 26, you make a second Final Four run, you got to prove you're not a one-hit wonder. That's the reality of it. You can't look again like you did in 2023. That's what it comes down to. You can't be a 10-3 team, go 9-3 in the regular season, or 10-2 in the regular season and lose a bowl game, or 9-3 in the regular season, win your bowl game against an inferior opponent. You can't get to the back to the playoff and lose in the first round at home. You've got to make another run. That's how you shut them up. Not to say that if they get to the quarters and get beat by a really good team that goes on to win the title, it doesn't mean that it's a successful season. We're talking about what's going to change the narrative, not what defines a good season for Notre Dame. It's what changes the narrative. And the only thing that can change the narrative is that this team makes another run. I say, okay, this is 2 years in a row you guys have undersold Notre Dame. Last year, we understood it. I said, look, I'd have Notre Dame higher, but I'm fine, 10-11. It's too low for me, but I understand it. They got to prove this. But we both said, hey, I think this is a team that's got a shot to make a run at the at least the quarterfinals, if not the semifinals.
Yeah.
I didn't think that Notre Dame was a team that was going to be able to make a run all the way to the title game. I really didn't. Because especially like there were some injuries early on, but it's a lot of question marks. A lot of question marks on that team. Way fewer question marks this year than last year. And you're ranking them at basically the same spot. And that's the part that kind of drives me a little bit nuts, Trev.
No, that's fair. No, that's definitely fair. For me, when I look at changing the narrative for Notre Dame, it is twofold. I echo everything that you said about them having to make another run. Because a part of Notre Dame's program for the better half of 15 years, part of the narrative that is true is they do fall off after they have that type of season. And when I mean fall off, I don't mean they go 6-6, but they do have an underwhelming season that always follows. I know in 2019 they went 11-2, but you had some bad losses in 2019. That Michigan loss was bad.
Yeah, they didn't beat anybody. You've said it. They didn't beat anybody good that year.
No,
they didn't finish in the top 10 and didn't belong in the top 10.
2021, they somehow kept rising in the rankings, which is pretty wild, despite their best win being against Navy in the regular season in 2021.
Wisconsin, technically, I think.
Wisconsin, that's right.
When they played in 2021, yeah.
But they have to follow that up. On the field, another thing that they have to do is they have to be a more balanced offense. I've said this before, to help change the narrative, because Notre Dame made a national title run as a run-heavy team. And I am under the assumption, until proven wrong, that people are just going to continue to talk about Notre Dame the way that they're just a great defensive team and run the ball well. But once they get to that level of opponent, if you can't pass the ball, you're going to fall short. For me, I think I need Notre Dame's offense to be more of a balanced attack. I'm not saying they have to go throw the ball 45 times a game, but this season, you can't have an offense where we go to the pass when we need to. It's a consistent part of the offense. I think that will also help change.
Here's my frustration though, Trev, is I do think that is true that teams look at a team like Notre Dame and they're like, well, they weren't a very good offense because they didn't throw the ball. They scored. This is an interesting statistic that you and I were talking about before the show started. This notion that Notre Dame's offense wasn't very good last year. Like, we had a buy so hold question yesterday saying like the Notre Dame defense is going to finish in the top 15 and the offense is going to finish in the top 10. I'm like, so basically what you're saying is they're going to do what they did last year. A lot of people don't realize Notre Dame finished last year 10th in college football at the end of this whole season in scoring offense. They scored more points last year per game than Ohio State, Oregon, Clemson, Syracuse, Bama, Penn State, way more than three more than Penn State and more than Texas. Penn State and Texas ranked 28th and 29th in scoring offense last year. Georgia ranked 38th in scoring offense last year. Notre Dame ranked 10th in scoring offense last year. And so my frustration is like you say that, and I think from a perception standpoint, I think there is some truth to that, Trev. But my issue is Penn State last year ranked 66th in college football in passing yards per game. They ranked 79th the year before that. Penn State, Drew Aller last year averaged 207 yards passing per game last year. That's it. 207.9. He ranked 8.4 yards per catch or per attempt. He was 6.8 the year before that. And it's like, so you say that, but their number one ranked team has a quarterback that in 16 games barely went over 3,300 yards. That's my thing. Is like they're not a team that like looks a whole lot different. Even with a stud like Tyler Warren, they were barely over 200 yards a game passing last year. Their starting quarterback was. As a team, they were at 227.9, but their starting quarterback was at 207.
Yeah, numbers wise, you're not wrong. But when people talk about Penn State's offense and the weapons that they have, they always start with Tyler Warren. That's my point.
Right.
If Notre Dame doesn't have that this season, the narrative will continue to remain the same. Nationally, then
let me maybe alter what we're saying here a little bit. They need someone to step up and be considered a stud in the pass game, even if the pass game's not a whole lot better. Because if they only average 227 yards per game this year, 20 of that comes from the backups. That's not a very good passing team. But if Malachi Fields is a 1,000-yard receiver and a guy that people are projecting as a first-round pick, the perception will be that they have a competent pass attack. So what you're saying is not even that they are necessarily that much better throwing. They just need to have something that makes them seem like they're that way. I mean, I think there's something to that. I think there's a lot of it is the reason I focus on the winning is because there's still a perception that Notre Dame can't win big games. Here's my problem with that. That should have been eliminated last year. You all said they couldn't beat A&M, and they did. None of you people at ESPN predicted them to beat Georgia, and they did. No, I don't know many people at ESPN that predicted them to beat Penn State, and they did. Eventually, you kept picking against them, and eventually you got it right. The other issue is the reason that they're considered not to be able to win big games is because of what happened when Brian Kelly was the head coach. Then how do you have him ahead of where Notre Dame is now? As I said, Marcus Freeman won more big bowl games in a week last year for Notre Dame than Brian Kelly won in 11 years at Notre Dame. So I can acknowledge that, hey, Notre Dame still has to prove more to me, even to me, that last year wasn't a fluke.
Mm-hmm.
But how can you then say, but we're going to give Brian Kelly, who's never lost fewer than 3 games at LSU, we're going to give him the benefit of the doubt, and we're not going to give it to Marcus Freeman, who's had a better coach, has been a better coach and a better team. And if anyone spends 5 minutes of research on Notre Dame, you're going to be like, dude, there's not many Brian Kelly guys in this roster. There aren't. That's the thing that gets me. Is like what you're saying, Trev, that's valid analysis. Listen, Notre Dame's had years like last year before. They played for the title in 2012. They were a playoff team, made it to the Final Four in 2018. They were a Final Four team in 2020. And in every single year, they were not as good the next year. That's a fair point. So we're going to go ahead and rank them behind LSU, whose head coach is the guy that did all that. That's where you lose me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's where you lose me. That's where I'm like, nope, I'm not buying it now.
In a program that has made the playoffs once in its existence. And in order to win it all, they had arguably the best offense that's ever been assembled in college football. I mean,
not coached by the current coach.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that's what gets me, man. I agree. It's the consistency of winning big games.
Yeah.
But a lot of the narrative and some of it is just stuff that I've heard amongst, some of my friends who I hold in high regard that aren't Notre Dame fans. It's what I've been hearing in different podcasts. It is big picture. It's winning the big game. But the reason still why people don't think that Notre Dame can consistently win big games is they think they're handicapped from a passing offense standpoint.
Sure.
Because it's all, they can run the ball and they have a great defense, but can they throw? That is always the argument, which is you would have thought that with their non-passing quarterback last year doing what he did in the semifinals in the second half of the national championship game would have turned that narrative around, especially considering they're bringing in somebody that is a better passer. You would have thought that would have changed around a little bit, but it still hasn't, which is really upsetting.
And I agree with that. I expect more from national analysts who are then going to not hold that same standard to other people. That's where I just keep coming down to, Trev, is just that right there. It's like that would be a fair point to make if your number 1 ranked team also wasn't a very mediocre throwing team. And I'll point to again, Marcus Freeman is 14-5 as a head football coach in games where the 2 opponents are both ranked, and 3 of those losses are to Ohio State.
It's fair enough.
So
I think
they went 7-1 this past year against ranked opponents. 7-1. So 4-2 in his first year, 3-2 in 2023. And each year, one of those losses was to Ohio State. So, yes, rank Ohio State. Notre Dame should never be ranked ahead of Notre Dame in a preseason ranking until they prove that they're better than Ohio State. I'm not going to sit there and dispute that. How can I justify ranking them? And I understand where you're coming, Trev, because you're applying a consistent logic. And I totally get it. You're saying, look, I'm evaluating the rosters. And I'm saying, looking at it big picture with the way that they're looking at this, if you're going to say, well, precedent history, how could you ever rank Notre Dame ahead of Ohio State?
Sure.
You can't. They got to prove it.
Sure.
But you can't use that logic for Texas. You can't use that logic for Penn State. You can't.
Agreed.
Because you know what Penn State's record was last year against ranked teams, Trev? Do you have a sense of what that was? I'm going to go through it right now. I'm not setting you up. I'm asking you genuinely.
2-4.
They beat Illinois, number 19 Illinois. They beat number 10 SMU, number 9 Boise State, and they were 3-3. They lost to Ohio State, Oregon, and Notre Dame. So they were 3-3 against ranked teams last year. The year before, they were 1-3. So in the last 2 years, Penn State has gone 4-6 against ranked teams. So in the last 2 years, Penn State has 3 fewer wins over top 25 teams than what Marcus Freeman had in the 2024 season alone. Actually, I'm going to add another to it, Trev. Do you know what they were in 2022? In his first year, Marcus Freeman's first year, Penn State was 1-2 against ranked teams. One of the wins was a win over Utah. In the last 3 years, Penn State is 5-8 against ranked opponents. Marcus Freeman and Notre Dame are 14-5. Explain to me how Penn State's ever had ranked ahead of Notre Dame. That's actually probably we should take a break here, give us the outro, and this will lead right into what the next conversation is.
Yes, sir. Well, hey, that's going to do it for the first part of the show where we broke down Notre Dame as a team. We're getting ready to talk about Marcus Freeman specifically in the same light about changing narratives. Don't go anywhere, folks. But before we transition to that next segment, please be sure to hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit that notification bell, share this podcast with your friends and family. But as always, the best way to support what we do here is subscribe to the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. All right, Brian, we're going to switch gears a little bit and get a little bit more granular talking about this Notre Dame football program. And now we're going to focus on the head coach, Marcus Freeman specifically, because there's also been a lot of rankings coming out ranking the coaches coming into this season. And there's a good amount of people, us included, that are pretty upset and question where Marcus Freeman's position is on some of these lists relative to who they have ranked around him. And so we're going to begin this segment talking about how, look, Marcus Freeman, there's still respect to earn out there for him this upcoming season as well. We're going to continue to break down some of the coaches that were ranked above him and try to put our other shoes on from a different lens to see why it makes sense. Spoiler alert, doesn't really. And then we're going to once again talk about why the perception is the way that it is. So, Brian, when we start talking about Marcus Freeman and some of the things that he still has left to prove, despite coming out of a really spectacular 2024 season, where do you begin?
I think let us begin with where we wish that the national media would begin with, which is fairness and honesty. I think there is still a level of Marcus Freeman needs to prove some things before I put him on the same level as a Dabo Swinney, who he's 1-1 against, as a Kirby Smart. Yes, he beat Kirby Smart last year. This isn't a what have you done for me lately discussion. This is, in my opinion, to truly evaluate coaching rankings, you got to go back at least 3 seasons. You have to look at history, trends. Otherwise, you just kind of get caught up in the, well, they did this last year, but let's ignore what they did previous year. You have to have some context. Like, I'm not going to look at Kenny Dillingham. Well, he's not that good of a coach. They went 3-9 his first year. Went 3-9 because he inherited a terrible program. And so there's always got to be some context. But when you look at Marcus Freeman and you say, we've had some great wins. In his 3 years at Notre Dame is 14-5 against ranked opponents. They've never had a losing record against ranked opponents, something Brian Kelly did constantly in his career. Because there'd be years like, what was it, in 2021, 2019, they went like 1-2 against teams that finished the year ranked. I think they were like around 2-2 against teams that were ranked when they played. But you're talking about a coach that's 14-5. He's coming off of a 7-1 year. He was even before this past year, he was 7-4 in his first 2 years. But all anybody ever wanted to talk about was you lost to Marshall, you lost to Stanford, you lost to Louisville, you lost to Clemson, who wasn't even that good. And the answer is that's fair. And then you come out in 2024 and you beat Texas A&M, which is a huge win for him. And then you lose to Northern Illinois. And it's kind of like, here we go again. Well, there were some things that we saw early in the year that we questioned about, look, if he doesn't fix this, he's not going to be the coach that we hope he's going to be. This has to get fixed. Well, guess what, Trev? It got fixed. and noticeably fixed. And we pinpointed it like, look, this Louisville game was very interesting because we saw this, this, and this. Let's see what happens when we come out of the bye. And they came out of the bye a very different football team in almost every regard. They made tweaks to defense. They made some major tweaks of their offense. Their attitude was different. They played with more fire. They were the aggressor more than they were early when coach was doing the whole, we just got to be methodical again. Let Miami, Ohio's defense dictates things to, they should never dictate a thing to Notre Dame. A thing ever to Notre Dame. And that was frustrating. But the whole point is, but do you evolve? And he evolved, and he grew, and he got better to the point where we're in the postseason. We're like, dude, he's coaching circles around James Franklin in the second half. He is coaching circles around Kirby Smart right now. And you just look at that, and it's just one example. But you look at that fake they ran against Georgia. How many coaches have the stones to make that call in that moment? Because I believe it was a 20-10, or it was 20-10.
Yes. No, at that, it might have just been 23-10 at that point.
I'm gonna go.
I'm pretty sure it was just 23-10.
But if it was 23-10, same thing. With how much time was left in that game, that doesn't work. You're in big, 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 big trouble. Because you're now in a situation, Trevor, where you're giving them a very short field to go. And you don't get that, you're in trouble. Let me see it here. It was on the drive where they were up 23-10. There was 7:17 left on the clock in the game. 7:17, and you are at your own 18-yard line. If that doesn't work, you're giving Georgia the ball with 7 minutes left at the 18-yard line. Like, let's say that Pat Coogan snaps the ball late and the Georgia guy gets back. They don't, or the refs just missed the call and they don't throw that flag. And Riley throws an incomplete pass to Bo Collins, and Georgia takes over with over 7 minutes left at the 18-yard line. That game changes completely. But the reason it worked is because you could tell Notre Dame was absolutely prepared for that moment. They'd practiced it. They knew this is how we're going to do it. Even something as simple as don't touch the ball. Because if you touch the ball, we can't do this. You can't touch the ball. You can't even really get down in your stance to be prepared to touch the ball. You run off directly. You can't cross the line of scrimmage. Did you notice that too? They ran directly off. They didn't cross the line of scrimmage. And then the other guys ran on where they ran on. And then you're prepared for, if Georgia does this, we snap the ball. If they don't, then they would have just let the clock run down, called timeout, and punted the ball. But they were prepared for that moment. And that won the game. Georgia gets off to a good start. They take a lead. Notre Dame never flinches.
Yeah.
Georgia flinched. Notre Dame takes a 6-3 lead. Georgia flinched. And that results in an R.J. Oben sack. And you get the ball. You make it 13-3. Your special teams makes another big play, and it's over after one play of the third quarter. It was effectively over at that point in time. They were not going to score 17 unanswered points against Notre Dame's defense to tie that ball game up, much less score enough to win. Wasn't going to happen. It was just, well, what's the final going to be now? Well, yeah, but you won because of isn't special teams a part of being a really well-coached football team?
Last I checked.
And you look at how he had that team handle falling behind Penn State. There's no panic. There's none of that. It's like, we make adjustments. We come out the second half. They ran right at Penn State. And then defensively, they made some adjustments to slow down what had Penn State went right back to doing in the third quarter, what they would work so well in the first half. And I get it. Make them stop it. Well, Notre Dame did. And that gave them enough room to get back in the game. And they had a little bit of officiating help in that game also to take away an interception. That should have been an interception. That was a bad call against Jack Kaiser. But there was no panic. There was no like the frustration is Northern Illinois and against Stanford and Marshall is you're playing poorly and you did nothing to stop it. You didn't. One of the things we said last year was however Notre Dame starts is how they're going to finish. Like this team has not shown the ability to get out of a funk when they're not playing well. When they started poorly against Louisville, they kept playing poorly. When they started playing poorly against Duke, they kept doing it. Clemson kept doing it. If you jump on Notre Dame, if Notre Dame jumps on you, you're toast. You're not going to come back against Notre Dame. The only time they had ever really come back in a game where they were down big was Ohio State, but they still ended up losing. Because remember, they down 10-0 against Ohio State in 2023. And, it's just kind of how they were. Well, last year we saw something different. We saw them struggle early against Georgia Tech and then just poured on. Riley completes like 12 in a row and they get hot. We hadn't seen that from Notre Dame because, as we said, how they started is how they finished. That's how it was against Georgia Tech. There were no buttons Marcus Freeman knew how to push against Northern Illinois. None. He had nothing to go to when they came out the way they did. He was completely unprepared to make adjustments. But you know what we've said about Marcus Freeman for 3 years is that dude does not make the same mistake twice. That's part of being a smart football coach. Every football coach has things where, dude, my third year is this or my second year is this. I wasn't sure how to handle it. But I promise you the next time I got in that situation, I knew how to handle it. And that's what we saw from Coach Freeman last year. So I think in a lot of ways, he still has to show for 2 years and a couple games in your career, you've shown to be a very inconsistent football coach. The results are such. Now you change that, but like we said about the team, now you've got to go out and show that you can avoid those Northern Illinois type of losses, those Marshall type of losses, even the Clemson loss 2 years ago. They had no business losing that team. They weren't very good and they were missing 8 starters. But the run we saw after that said a lot about Marcus Freeman. So I think when you talk about being honest and fair, if you don't want to have Marcus Freeman as a top 3 or 4 coach, I understand that. He has things to prove to me, to all of us, to be in that truly upper echelon where we're like, okay, yeah, he outcoached Kirby in that game, but is anyone going to try to tell me that he's a overall for the, his career, even the last 3 years, Kirby's won a title, went 13-1, and his down year is the year that Marcus Freeman's best team beat them in the quarterfinals of the National Football Playoff. So he still has a lot to prove in that regard, to win. What I think he has done, however, especially last year, is proven that I'm not winning because of anything Brian Kelly did. Brian Kelly's team has not been a thing for me. There are very few Brian Kelly guys on that team last year. Very few. And this team, there will be almost, I don't think, any that ever actually played for Brian Kelly because all the veterans are gone. So I think that's a big part of it too, Trev, is that. Somebody said to gain respect, beat teams with higher recruiting rankings. They did that multiple times last year. A&M and Georgia and Penn State all consistently have higher ranked recruiting classes than Notre Dame. So they've done that.
I'll say this. The thing that made the Northern Illinois loss so frustrating was it was the first time in Marcus Freeman's career that we saw him make the same mistake twice. And that's what I think hurt so much, because up to that point he hadn't. But the Northern Illinois loss after a big road game was the same mistake that we saw in his first year coaching. That was the first time that I can say we saw Marcus Freeman make the same mistake twice. Now, wasn't repeated over the course of the remainder of the season, to your point, which put a lot of minds at ease, mine included. The thing that bothers me about how Marcus Freeman is looked at now is twofold. One, a lot of how people feel about Marcus Freeman, I think, is a derivative of how they feel about Notre Dame's team as a whole. I'm not mad that Marcus Freeman's getting disrespected, because I don't think that he is. He's getting highlighted, but for the wrong reasons.
If you rank him as a top 10 coach, Trev, you're not disrespecting him.
No, not at all.
Right, we both agree on that. This is a different conversation than the one before, sort of.
But the thing that bothers me is people talk about, and we're going to get much more into the weeds with this, I promise you. But when people bring up Steve Sarkisian, Dan Lanning, a lot of it is, well, look at the talent they consistently bring in. Whereas Marcus Freeman is getting respect by, look how far he took this team without a single first-round draft pick, and Steve Angeli leaves and Al Golden leaves. That's why Marcus Freeman is a great coach. That is true. To a degree, that is true, with the amount of injuries that he had to overcome last season, and He's going into the national championship game without Ben Morrison and Riley Mills, and his second best defensive tackle on the team is banged up playing at 50%, and they've had issues throwing the football. All that is true, but very few people are willing to step back and say, and also Marcus Freeman is bringing in loads of top-tier talent. Leonard Moore didn't become a true freshman All-American because he has a nice smile.
Right. Or because Mike Mickens is a great coach, and that's the only reason.
Yes.
It's because he's a great coach and Leonard Moore's super talented.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
When I look at Marcus Freeman in respect of where he falls on this list, there are 3 coaches that I can confidently say at this point should be ranked ahead of him. It's Kirby Smart, Dabo Swinney, and Ryan Day. Pains me to say Ryan Day and throw him in there, but he just won a national championship. Whether people like it or not, he is now one of 3 active coaches in the FBS with a national championship.
A Division I FBS
Yes.
national championship, right? Because it's Kirby, it's
Dabo,
Ryan Day, and Dabo.
Mm-hmm.
Because Mac Brown retired, so he's not there anymore, and Brian Kelly never won at this level.
Mm-hmm.
Because then it's like Lance Leopold won D3, and Cursignetti won 1AA, and Brian Kelly won D2. We're talking about FBS that actually is relevant.
Yes.
Yeah.
The other thing that they have going for them, at least in my memory, they've had games where they've dropped before that they probably shouldn't have. Clemson probably more recently than either Ohio State or Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
But those programs never had a Marshall loss.
I think the team with the most recent really bad loss is Ohio State.
Michigan.
Yeah, I mean, that's not any worse than what happened to Clemson the year before.
Sure.
It's not as bad as the Northern Illinois loss, but it's worse than the Clemson loss.
It is. No, you're right. You're right.
Georgia hasn't had that in a few years.
No.
Like the 2 losses Georgia had this year were both really good, talented football. I mean, worst team they lost to was Alabama.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. In what was probably one of the better football games of the entire season. Nuts.
His team didn't quit in that game. They
Sure
didn't quit. And you give them respect for that. And they didn't quit against Notre Dame either. They were just not as good as Notre Dame.
Mm-hmm. But those are the 3 coaches that I can confidently, if anybody wants to come at me and say, hey, Ryan Day's heading into the season should be ranked ahead of Marcus Freeman coachable, I have no argument against that. Marcus Freeman's 0-3 against him. Ohio State just won a national championship. It's like, well,
I don't think Notre Dame.
Exactly.
Right.
It's like, I don't think Kirby Smart should. Notre Dame won the head-to-head match. It's like, yeah, but overall, Kirby Smart has 2 national championships. And their down season, they won 11-3, won the conference, were in the college football.
Because if you're going to go there, then you say, okay, then Thomas Hammock's a better coach than Marcus Freeman. So is David Shaw, if he was still coaching, because he went 1-0 against Notre Dame.
Exactly.
You know, let's put what's the head coach at Southern Miss's name? Charles Huff, who was at Marshall in 2022. You're going to rank him ahead of Marcus Freeman just because he went 1-0 against him? No, it's about the entirety of what you do.
Exactly.
Just like I'm not putting Sharon Moore ahead of Ryan Day.
No, you're 100% correct. And that's where, when I start thinking about this conversation, that's where I begin. There's 3 coaches that I think have legitimate justification to be ranked ahead of Marcus Freeman. Everybody outside of that, not saying there's no argument, but it's a stretch, especially compounded with what Marcus Freeman has done against ranked opponents and what he did last season with a depleted starting lineup because of all the injury issues that they had. And that's what gets me fired up when I look at these lists I don't get mad when people want to put Day, Dabo, or Kirby Smart ahead of him. I truly don't. I'm not saying it doesn't pain me, but
Dabo's got 2 titles.
Yeah.
And yes, one of them was like 9 years ago, but dude has 2 titles and beat Notre Dame in their most recent meeting, and they're trending back up. He's made some adjustments. He's made some hires. He's got them kind of trending back up. He deserves, like, that's my top 3, and I don't know why that's debatable.
100%.
Because you can't say, well, you can't have Dabo ahead of Sark because Sark beat them last year. Then why do you have Sark ahead of Kalen DeBoer?
No facts.
Why do you have Dan Lanning ahead of Kalen DeBoer? Because neither one of those guys have ever beaten Kalen DeBoer, ever. So again, let's be consistent with this. What defines where you are as a head football coach? It's the totality of what you do, your overall record. It's, how far you take your teams, the success you have, things like that. It's also about how do you do when you play teams that are kind of on your level. How do you perform in big games? Everybody wants to tell me how great Dan Lanning is, and he's done this, and he's done that, and he's had better years than Marcus Freeman. Well, maybe that's because they've played softer schedules than what Notre Dame has played. if you look at the last 3 years, Marcus Freeman and Dan Lanning have been head coaches the same amount of time. You say, well, Dan Lanning had a better team than Marcus Freeman did in 2023. Did he really? Like, are we sure about that? A better quarterback, but are we really sure that he definitely had a better team? You know, they beat a ranked Colorado team. They lost to Washington twice. Their other wins were what? Over Utah and Oregon State by a similar score than the score that Notre Dame beat them by. They beat Liberty in a bowl game. His first year at Oregon, he went 3-3 against ranked opponents. Marcus Freeman went 4-2. In his second year at Oregon, he went 3-3 against ranked opponents. Marcus Freeman went 3-2. In his third year at Oregon, he went 3-1 against ranked opponents. Marcus Freeman went 7-1 in their 3 years as head football coaches. Dan Lanning actually, I think I got that. I'm one off on that. 3-2. They did not lose 3 games last year. They lost 2 games last year. So they went 3-2 against ranked teams. So excuse me. So they had the same exact record as Marcus Freeman. And in 3 years at Notre Dame, Marcus Freeman has gone 14-5 against ranked opponents. In 3 years at Oregon, Dan Lanning has gone 9-6 against ranked opponents. So again, I point to who's better. Well, somebody said in the chat, and PJC is being somewhat sarcastic with this comment because other people say this, Oregon has had better recruiting classes, therefore they are better. He's being sarcastic, but the point he's making is, okay, doesn't that then speak to Marcus Freeman should be considered better because he's actually winning more against the better teams than Dan Lanning is with, quote-unquote, a better roster?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point.
So, and I don't want to hear he isn't overrated. We're not saying he's overrated. We're saying he shouldn't be ranked ahead of Marcus Freeman. That's the argument. It goes back to what we talked about in the first segment. Why does he get the benefit of the doubt that Marcus Freeman does not? Well, Marcus Freeman's made some bad in-game decisions. I would encourage you to go back and watch both Washington-Oregon games in 2023 if you want to talk about poor in-game decisions. But what has he done? He's 9-6 against ranked opponents. He's lost more games against ranked teams than Marcus Freeman has, but he's coached in fewer games against top 25 teams. So why is he ranked ahead of Marcus Freeman? Well, he's got a big win over Ohio State. Okay, fair. Notre Dame beat Georgia. He coached against Georgia a couple years ago. What happened? 49-3. Well, come on, dude. That was his first game, and Georgia won the title that year. Okay, fair. Marcus Freeman's first game, they lost 21-10 at Ohio State, and a game they led late in the third quarter, and Ohio State played Georgia that year and lost by a point in the playoffs. So, well, he got a bigger bowl win earlier. Yeah, it's a great win over Liberty. That's good stuff. I mean, so, that's my point. Is I think Dan Lanning's a very good football coach. I'm not saying he's over. I'm not saying he should be 15th. But you can't rank him ahead of Notre Dame. You can't rank him ahead of Marcus Freeman, excuse me. And it kind of goes back to the whole thing, Trev, of if we're going to apply a standard to Marcus Freeman, if we're going to apply a standard to Notre Dame, then we have to be able to apply that standard consistently.
100%.
So is it just about overall record? Well, he's had a better record than Marcus Freeman. I would argue he inherited a better roster than Marcus Freeman did. That's what I think is true. Because Oregon didn't start just recruiting well when Dan Lanning arrived. That's not when recruiting picked up for Oregon. They've always recruited well, and he's done a great job since he's been there. This is not meant to disparage Dan Lanning. It's meant to say, why is he getting overhyped? Why is he getting – and that's different from being overrated. Why is Dan Lanning being put in top 3s and 4s? Why is Steve Sarkisian in top 3s or 4s? That's my question.
I'm even more sympathetic to Steve Sarkisian being ranked ahead of Marcus Freeman than I am Dan Lanning. Or I'm sorry, other way around. My mistake. I'm more sympathetic to Dan Lanning to a degree being ranked ahead of Marcus Freeman than I am of Steve Sarkisian. Here's why. Steve Sarkisian has had more of a history of not performing well.
Mm-hmm.
Just through that light alone. What he's done in Texas the last couple of years has been good. I'll admit it.
Yeah.
But he has also had a pretty rough history of being a head coach as well. It hasn't just been Steve Sarkisian hasn't been a 10-11 win football coach every single year that he's been a head coach. And so I'm more sympathetic to that standpoint. I'm not saying I agree with either of them being ahead of Notre Dame or ahead of Marcus
I do
Freeman.
agree with your point, though, Trev, that if you're going to make a case for one of them, you could make a better case for Dan Lanning.
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, I think it just goes back to how long has Texas been back? I mean, I think some of that Steve Sarkisian feeds into, if I'm just being honest with you, because I haven't had somebody build me a legitimate argument yet as to why Steve Sarkisian is ranked ahead of, it came from the Nick Saban coaching crew. Okay, I'm not asking about Nick Saban.
So Lane Kiffin, why isn't he in there?
I don't understand. Like if somebody could tell me who Steve Sarkisian, what he has done in the job specifically.
He's getting a lot of credit, in my opinion, for beating Alabama in 2023. But let's be honest, that was not a great Alabama team. That you can't give him credit for that and then try to poo-poo Marcus Freeman beating Kirby Smart in a down year for Georgia.
Yeah, that's facts.
You can't do it. That's kind of my issue.
That's totally fair. No, that's totally fair. I sit back and I think I can't really figure out why either of them are. Some of it comes down, a lot of it's narrative driven. Some of it's style. I'm talking like style of play on the field, I suppose. Lanning and Sark are both offensive guys, whereas Marcus Freeman's the defensive guy. I think defensive coaches naturally just don't get as much backing to them until they go win a championship, like a Kirby Smart type of coach. So maybe that could play into it as well. All of these things, again, I'm not saying I agree with it.
Yeah.
But what I always try to do is when something comes up like this, I try to see what potentially the other side could be making the argument for. Because a lot of what I'm hearing is derivatives of other things. But
this is narrative driven as well, because last year, Trevor, who scored more points per game, Notre Dame or Texas?
Notre Dame.
In 2023, who scored more points per game, Notre Dame or Texas?
Notre Dame.
Notre Dame. By over 3 points both years. So, yeah, we can talk all we want about Steve Sarkisian's a great coach and a great offensive mind, and he is all those things. But why are we saying like, okay, Notre Dame's got some sort of issue? Because here's another point. Okay, well, Notre Dame's defense did. Okay, cool. Who had more yards per play this year, Notre Dame or Texas? Notre Dame. Who had more yards per play in 2023, Notre Dame or Texas? Notre Dame. But yet Notre Dame's this offensively challenged program, and Texas is not. Notre Dame has finished in the top 10 in scoring the last 2 years. Both years, Notre Dame finished 7th in 2023, 10th this year. Texas has not scored in the top 10 in scoring in the last 2 years, and they weren't even in the top 25 last year in scoring. In the last 3 years, Texas has gone 11-9 against ranked opponents. Marcus Freeman and Notre Dame have gone up 14-5. Take away his first year, which was kind of continuing to build from inheriting a bad situation. Last 2 years, Sark has done better. 10-5. It's better. Notre Dame has gone 10-3. So it's still better. In the postseason, the last 2 years, Steve Sarkisian is 2-3. Or excuse me, 2-2. Marcus Freeman's 3-1. I ask again, what metric are you using to define Steve Sarkisian as being a better head football coach than Marcus Freeman?
Also, if your main argument is that Steve Sarkisian, quote, made Texas tougher, I beg you to go watch both Georgia games and the fourth quarter of the Ohio State game.
Thank you.
If that is your main argument, then we have two completely different definitions of tough.
Yeah.
Because they got bullied.
Yeah. So USMA made a comment. He said, but Sark did that in the SEC, clearly a difference. And then he followed up with like sarcasm. But like, here's the thing. I point to his comment because people will point to that. So I repeat again, Notre Dame and Georgia played two common opponents from the SEC last year. Notre Dame beat one of them by 13, where they were the more physical team. That team beat A&M or beat Texas twice. once with their backup quarterback playing half the game, and they were losing when the backup quarterback went into the game. They then went, the first time they went into Austin and smacked Texas all around the field. So again, I ask, what about it is there? And again, I like Steve Sarkisian. I think he's a good football coach. He should be considered one of the 10 best coaches in college football. My question is why are we saying he's better than Marcus Freeman? Here's another thing, Mark, to your point. Steve Sarkisian has been a head football coach, I believe, for 11 years. Let me just look this up here real quick. He was a head football coach at Washington for 5 seasons. Mm-hmm. He was the head coach at USC for 2 seasons. And he's been the head coach at Texas for 11 seasons. So this is a guy that was at pretty prominent programs. Washington, USC, and Texas. And in those 11 years, Steve Sarkisian is at a grand total of 2 10-win seasons. This past year in 2023. Marcus Freeman has been a head coach for 3 seasons. And in those 3 seasons, he's had 2 teams that finished with 10 or more wins. He won 9 games with Drew Pine and Tyler Buckner the same year that Steve Sarkisian went 8-5 with Quinn Ewers. So, again, it comes down to where's the consistency with which you're applying these metrics. It comes down to its narratives. It's narratives. Marcus Freeman's made some bad in-game decisions. So has Steve Sarkisian. So has Dan Lanning. That's part of growing as a football coach. And growing, well, Steve Sarkisian's in year 11. True, but it's different at Texas. It's a different environment. And that's not like, oh, Texas is better. It's with anything. It's when Nick Saban went from LSU to the Dolphins and back to Bama, it's still different at Bama than it is at LSU. Not better, not worse, not harder, not easier. It's different. So there's always an evolution when you're taking over a new place. Well, he couldn't build Washington around. Well, Chris Peterson didn't have much of a problem with that.
Sure.
Kalen DeBoer took over a 4-8 Washington team and they won, 24 games in 2 years? Okay, he had the portal, fine, but Washington could recruit pretty well. I mean, he had Jake Locker, I think, for part of his career at Washington. So I just kind of point back to the aspect of you have to give me something concrete that tells me why so-and-so coach is better than so-and-so coach. And if all you got's overall record, well, that's fine, but that doesn't really work with Steve Sarkisian and Marcus Freeman because I don't believe that that's accurate. If you go back and look at the last 2 years, see here. So Steve Sarkisian in his last 3 years at Texas, you pull up Marcus Freeman's record, and then I'm going to pull up Steve Sarkisian. So in the last 3 years at Texas, Steve Sarkisian has gone 33-10. Marcus Freeman in 3 years at Notre Dame has gone, wait for it, 33-10. So, let me sure I'm making that correct. No, 33-9. See, 20, 30, yes. He's gone 8-5, 12-2, and 13-3. And Marcus Freeman has gone 9-4, 10-3, 14-2. Same exact record. Marcus Freeman has 3 more wins over top 25 teams, 4 fewer losses against top 25 teams. Dan Lanning, in his 3 years, actually has the better overall record. Dan Lanning's record the last 3 years is better. I would also argue he inherited the best situation, but that's a different conversation for a different day. Yeah. He's gone 35-6, so 2 more wins, 3 fewer losses than Marcus Freeman has. So, okay, give him that, but then let's dive into some of the data, and here's the biggest difference between Marcus Freeman and Dan Lanning. And here's where you could make an argument. Well, Marcus Freeman's 14-5 against ranked teams. That means he has 4 losses to unranked teams. That's where Marcus, you say, what does Marcus Freeman have to do this year? It's that right there. Get rid of that. Stop losing those games. I'll make the case for you. Like he's proven he can win big games. He's got 14 wins over ranked teams, 7 last year. He's had a winning record against ranked opponents his last 3 years. Not something his predecessor did, certainly. And Steve Sarkisian has a losing record against ranked teams in the last 3 years, and Dan Lanning has a 500 record against ranked teams in his first year. Marcus Freeman's never had a 500 or worse record against ranked teams. Dan Lanning has lost 6 games at Oregon, all against ranked opponents. All against ranked opponents. Steve Sarkisian, we talked about, has gone 33-10, same as Marcus Freeman. He's only lost to 1 unranked opponent in that time. That's it, in that 3-year stretch. That's the difference. If you want to point to a reason, that's it. That would be it for at least one of them. I don't know that I can buy that for both of them, but I would then argue, I would say, see, I would actually argue that I would say that I think Steve Sarkisian has a better argument to make than Dan Lanning. And the reason I would say that is obviously he's made the playoffs twice. Lanning did it once.
Yeah.
And Lanning failed to make the playoffs a year when he was in the Pac-12. And that's kind of like, where Sark goes to the SEC and gets into the playoff and probably gets in even if it was only a 14 playoff.
It's fair.
Probably. That's the difference for me is that. And he has actually won a postseason game in the playoff. And I get that he got to go against Clemson and Arizona State, but his team was also far more competitive against Ohio State in the postseason than Dan Lanning's was.
Sure.
That was the worst game Ohio State played in the playoffs, and some of it you have to give to Texas. Defensively especially, I thought Texas called a great game against Ohio State. Part of the reason Ohio State didn't play well against Texas is because of the defense. The problem that I have, though, is in a lot of these games where Dan Lanning's teams have lost, it's the offense that's sputtered. Where the best part of Marcus Freeman is supposed to be the defense, in the last 2 years, it's that defense that's carried the team. Last 2 years, Steve Sarkisian is supposed to be an offensive coach, but it's been the defense that's carried that team.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's something that I point to as well. So, and the same thing with Dan Lanning. Now, part of that is a compliment to them that they've been able to get the other side of the ball going. But part of that also is, but has Texas really been better on offense than Marcus Freeman either? Because Notre Dame scored more points and averaged more yards per play. So yeah, it's right now, if I was doing a top coaches ranking, we've talked a little bit about this. I just can't justify putting Dan Lanning and Steven Sarkisian ahead of him, but I'm not as pissed about it as like LSU and Clemson being ranked ahead of Notre Dame for the 2025 season. Because I think there's a better case to make for that. And again, I think the big black eye on Marcus Freeman's record is 14-5 against top 25 teams is really impressive. But he's 33-9. That means he's got 4 losses against unranked teams. And it's not like those unranked teams went on to be like really good. Like, do you remember when there was a year where it was what year was it? But Notre Dame lost to somebody early, and I can't remember which year it was, but they lost to somebody, and it wasn't a great loss, but then that team went on to end up being really good. And there was also the year in 2013 when they beat Michigan State when Michigan State was unranked. And then Michigan State ends up going 13-1. And you look back and you're like, dude, that was a much better win than we thought it was at the time. It's not like you can point to that with Notre Dame either, Trev, because it's like, well, you lost to Stanford in 2020 or Marshall in 2022. They didn't finish ranked. You lost to Stanford in 2022. They didn't finish ranked.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, they only won one more game the entire year. You lost to Louisville. That they were a team that you lost to Clemson. They did finish the year, I believe, ranked. Hold on a second. Let me look back on this one real quick. I think Louisville finished the 2024 season or 2023 season ranked, but they weren't ranked when they played. I think they jumped in partly because of the win over Notre Dame, and then
in 23.
Yeah, they finished. They finished in the top 25.
I thought that at the time, I thought Louisville was 25th.
No. Clemson.
Oh,
Louisville was ranked when they played. I moved on to Clemson. Louisville was ranked. Clemson was not ranked when they played. They jumped in after also beating a ranked North Carolina team 2 weeks later. They weren't ranked again until they played South Carolina, beat South Carolina. They were 22nd when they played Kentucky, beat Kentucky in the bowl game, and so they finished ranked. but they weren't ranked when they played. So one of those 4 teams ended up being ranked at the end of the year that you lost to. Northern Illinois didn't get finished ranked. So it's Marshall, it's Stanford, it's Northern Illinois, and Clemson are the 4 unranked teams you lost to. Only one of those teams finished the season ranked, and that was Clemson. So you could even look at that Clemson game and say, hey, maybe they were a little bit better team than we thought. I don't buy it. I think that's making an excuse for a game you shouldn't have lost. But at least you can look and say they didn't lose again the rest of the year. Like they ran the table after that. Okay, fair. But it's those type of things where you can point to that and say that. And then what we had mentioned early on is there are some in-game things you can point to say he was not better than Steve Sarkisian in 2023. He was not better than Dan Lanning in 2023. But you got to say, okay, but what about now? Andrew Gilmore in the chat says, does 10 men on the field ring a bell? Yeah, I mean, you can't ignore that. When we're talking about a 3-year stretch, you can't ignore that. Agreed. And it's not 10 men on the field. Andrew's wrong. It's not 10 men on the field. I'm being sarcastic. It's 10 men on the field twice. Because
after a timeout.
2 plays. They didn't call a timeout. No. You did it twice after a timeout. And one of those was an incomplete pass on the sideline. That's part of the record. You can't ignore that. But to me, that's the only reason this is even a discussion. Because if it's not for stuff like that, this isn't even close. But you can't ignore that if you're a Marcus Freeman defender, which I think he deserves that because of what he's done. But you have to say, okay, but since then, what have we seen? Yeah, Northern Illinois, fair. But since then, and that's what makes the stretch differently. If you'd asked me in week 2 of the 2023-4 season, does Marcus Freeman rank ahead of Dan Lanning and Steve Sarkisian as coaches? I would have said no. Is that fair?
Yeah.
I would have said no, he doesn't. But when you fast forward to now, we have more evidence that's part of the conversation. And now I think it's fair to say that he should rank ahead of them. And I don't even have a huge problem with people that don't. I just, again, I don't like the fact that people will point to Marcus Freeman's failures and then not do the same thing to Lanning and Sarkisian. And here's an even bigger issue. It's the distance with which we see these. So Stuart Mandel this offseason ranked the top 10 coaches in college football. He had Steve Sarkisian 3, Dan Lanning 5, in between Kalen DeBoer. My answer is, why is Steve Sarkisian ranked ahead of Kalen DeBoer? Because they played recently, and Kalen DeBoer beat Steve Sarkisian and has played for a title. He's actually won a semifinal game. Whatever. It's got Dabo 6, fine. Lance Leopold 7. James Franklin 8. Matt Campbell 9. And Marcus Freeman 10. That's someone from The Athletic. That's a problem for me, Trev. I have a big problem with that. Like, how do you justify that? Bruce Feldman had a top 10. He has Kirby in day 1 and 2, which is how it should be. Should be Kirby 1, day 2. It's got Dabo 3. You and I would agree with that so far, right?
Yeah.
It's got Steve Sarkisian 4. Now we're having some problems. Kalen DeBoer 5. Marcus Freeman 6. Okay. Dan Lanning 7. James Franklin 8. Matt Campbell 9. Brian Kelly 10. So 2 guys from The Athletic. One has Freeman in between those 2. The issue I have is the one with Stuart Mandel, where he's got him ranked well behind those 2 coaches. And then I think the USA Today one that you sent me is somewhat similar to that, right, Trev?
Yeah, USA Today had Marcus Freeman ranked 7th.
Behind Dan Lanning, behind James Franklin, behind Steve Sarkisian. That's a problem. And there should not be a ranking on this planet. If you have Kalen DeBoer ranked behind Dan Lanning, you need to find something else to do with your life, because this whole covering football thing ain't for you. There's no justification for that at all. And it's not just the head-to-head. It's Kalen DeBoer's actually been to the college football playoff and won a game.
Yeah, the Stuart Mandel list I don't pay much attention to because when it's that egregious, because there is no justification.
It's a really nice word to describe that because I had a couple other different ones.
I have them loaded up, but I'm going to wait till we don't go live anymore. Look, man, look, when a list gets put together that is formatted that way, I don't pay attention to it. I truly don't, because it's like, okay, now we're just putting stuff out there to put stuff out there. That is clickbaity. If you want to rank Sark or Lanning ahead of Marcus Freeman, I don't think that's clickbaity. I think the people that do that genuinely believe it. And kind of what we've broken down over the last couple minutes is there are arguments to make, albeit I think they're pretty lazy arguments. The thing working against Marcus Freeman is the fact that he has those really bad losses, and there's no way around it. And that's such a hard coach to evaluate where they fall because, man, I mean, he went to the college football national championship last year. It's 14-5 in the last 3 years against ranked opponents. No other coaches can say that, with the exception of like the top of the top. But then some of the other coaches also can't say we lost to Northern Illinois, we lost to Marshall, we lost to Stanford. So that's what makes it hard to evaluate. But recency, I personally tend to carry more weight into what a coach did in 2024 than what they did in 2022.
To a degree, I would agree with you. I look at them all three together, and I look at the evolution. And I would argue that Dan Lanning has not really improved as a coach in his 3 years. I don't know that I would say that Steve Sarkisian has really said, hey, why do we lose these games? And then look to fix it. Now, maybe he does this year, but Marcus Freeman has looked at the things that have caused his team to say, hey, we can't keep doing this. And I point to this example. The Notre Dame team that lost to Northern Illinois is completely different than the team that went into the playoffs and beat Indiana, beat Georgia, beat Penn State, and then battled Ohio State. The Georgia team, or the Texas team that got beat by Georgia in the regular season, is the same team that got beat by Georgia in the SEC title game, and the same exact team that needed overtime to beat Arizona State, and is the same exact team that lost to Ohio State. He's done nothing to fix those issues so far. Now we'll see if, we get to that this year, and maybe some of these portal pickups or guys that they have evaluated like, hey, look, why did they get the kid from Syracuse or this kid? Maybe he's like, look, these kids are going to come in with an edge and an attitude, and we just need an influx of that in our team. Maybe that's the reason he went to the portal so heavily. We need to bring some guys in with chips on their shoulders, some guys with attitude. They're going to help us be softer. I would say, hey, maybe the problem in year 4 of your program isn't your players, since you recruited them all. Maybe it's you. Maybe it's how you run practice. All right. So, but hey, maybe he's addressed all those things. Maybe he has. And he'll go out this year and Texas will live up to what everybody's saying. That could happen, but we don't know that yet. We can only go on what we know now. But I would argue that Dan Lanning is the same guy now as he was in year 1. What has Dan Lanning shown that, hey, we figured this out? What has he done? He's had really good players. He can recruit real well. But when the game is on the line, and here's something somebody said. Dan Lanning was 13-0 and the number 1 seed in the college football playoffs. If they ended up on the opposite side of the bracket from Ohio State, I think they win at least one game, if not 2. You think they do. You don't know that. You have no clue. Because I've pointed out that in Dan Lanning's 3 years, he's not been very good at a conference and he's not been very good in the postseason, except when they play a far inferior team. They almost lost to North Carolina his first year at Oregon. North Carolina, who had one guy. That's it. It was Drake Mayshow.
Yeah.
They got annihilated by Georgia. Who's to say they would have done that? You think they would have done that. You think. Because again, you guys keep pointing to what he did in the regular season. We haven't said that that's not true. The only reason he's even in this conversation is because they went 13-0. But what happened when they got on the biggest stage? They got annihilated and never competed. Texas Tech was on the same side of the bracket as Ohio State. They were far more competitive than Oregon was. Notre Dame eventually had to get there. They at least battled back when they fell behind and showed some life early on. Oregon was after the first drive of that game, I'm like, this is over. They have no chance. They are not ready to be here. So, oh, great. They beat Ohio State at home by a point. Okay, that's a big win. Steve Sarkisian beat Alabama. Marcus Freeman beat Georgia. Marcus Freeman beat Penn State also on a neutral field. Great. So the point is like, again, and we're seeing Notre Dame fans doing the same thing, and an Ohio State fan, you're assuming certain things that you think are true that aren't true. I'm going off of what we know, what has happened. Not, well, what if Notre Dame would have won the title last year if Texas would have done a better job at the goal line, scored and knocked off Ohio State? I'm confident Notre Dame would have beat Texas in the national title game. And now where's Marcus Freeman ranking? You see what I'm saying? Like, I can play this game too. So, hey, man, I think we should credit Marcus Freeman as, he should kind of get an asterisk for winning the national title, because if Texas does a better job at the goal line and doesn't fumble that ball that Jack Sawyer runs back, I think they go into overtime and beat Ohio State because they had all the momentum, and then Notre Dame would certainly beat Texas because they would have out physical Texas. I actually believe that last part to be true. If Texas would have beat Ohio State, I think Notre Dame beats Texas. That's just as plausible as saying if Dan Lanning would have been on an opposite bracket from Ohio State, he would have won more games. Are we sure that they would have beat Penn State in a rematch? You don't know that. Are we sure they'd have beat Georgia? I don't know. I've only seen him play against Georgia once. They lost by 46. Marcus Freeman lost by the same score to Ohio State in game 3 as he won and lost in game 1. So you don't know that. You think that. You think he would have beaten them team. And maybe he would have. You don't know that. What I know is his team got to the playoff and was not competitive for 4 quarters. That's what I know. That's what I know. He got outcoached by Kalen DeBoer 3 times. That's the other thing, too, is if we're going to list the top coaches, Kalen DeBoer needs to be higher than all 3 of these coaches, in my opinion. Because his worst year is no different than really anybody else's worst year. When you look at what he stepped into at Bama, went 9-4, had some big wins, but this is also a guy that took freaking Washington to the national title game and is 3-0 against Dan Lanning and 1-0 against Steve Sarkisian. So, yeah.
Yeah, DeBoer definitely needs to be higher on some of these lists. That's for sure.
Yeah.
That is for sure.
Some do. Like, as bad as his list is, Mandel does have DeBoer ahead of Lanning. That's the good part about it. Here's what's funny, and this just kind of shows me when something's agenda-driven. This is the beginning sentence for Stuart Mandel in his rankings about Dan Lanning. Keep in mind, Dan Lanning and Marcus Freeman were hired the same year. We now have 3 seasons worth of data to conclude that Lanning, who is 35-6, is a pretty darn good football coach. This is what he says about Marcus Freeman 5 spots later. Though he only has a 3-year body of work as a head coach, he's one of just 8 active coaches who's coached in a national championship game. It's like, what? You just talked about the one dude. Now we have 3 years of data. What you're telling me is one guy you assumed was going to be good, and he's confirmed it because you now have 3 years of data. You betray yourself by your own words. Now we have 3 years of data to prove what I thought all along, which is Dan Lanning's a good football coach. Is that not what that reads? As opposed to Marcus Freeman, it's, well, I'm still not sold because we only have 3 years, but I have to put him in this list because he did beat Georgia and Penn State. Like, same page, number 5 versus number 10, same number of years as coaches, and think about how differently that was worded. First guy, we now have 3 seasons worth of data. Marcus Freeman, although he only has a 3-year body of work. That comes across to me like, it's only 3 years. I'm not sure. Like, does that not read completely different?
No, it 100% does. Again, that's why for Mandel, the second that you sent it to me, and I saw that Freeman was 10, I was like, I just automatically, I don't care about this list. Call it right or wrong. But like this, it's just
fair.
I saw it and I was like, there's no argument you can make for 9. 9 better coaches than Marcus Freeman. I just can't. I don't see it. Call me biased. Call me a homer. There is not an argument that you can make for Marcus Freeman to not be in the top 7 of coaches in college football.
Mm-hmm. Right.
There's not a single one. So,
yeah, I agree.
There's coaches broken down into tiers. There's coaches that I can confidently say are better than should be ranked higher than Marcus Freeman going into the 2025 season, and that's Day, Sweeney, and Smart. Mm-hmm. I don't really have an argument to be like, well, the arguments that I would make for Freeman to be above of those 3 guys would be the same arguments that people try to say for Lanning and Sark to be ahead of Freeman. They're there, but I don't think they carry that much weight. So those 3 I'm okay with. Then there's that tier 2 group of okay, you kind of see where they're coming from, I guess. And that's like Lanning, Sark, DeBoer. But then the other ones, if you're going to put Brian Kelly ahead of Marcus Freeman, then your list is invalid to me.
The one that got me was having James Franklin ahead of him by 2. Mm. I don't think, was the USA Today one, did he have James Franklin ahead of him as well? They did, actually. They had Franklin 5. That's a joke. But the other one was Lance Leopold at number 7. Now, listen, I've advocated for Lance Leopold should be considered a higher ranked coach than some people had him. He had Lance Leopold number 2 the year before, and he dropped him to 7. They went 4-8 last year. What was Kansas's record? 4-8, 5-7,
5-7, I think.
With the same running back, the same quarterback that they had the year before, 5-7, and had a blowout end of their season.
He had Lance Leopold as the number 2
7
best.
No, the year before last year, this time a year ago, he had Lance Leopold number 2.
Okay.
Yeah, with and I remember reading it. It was like, look, to do what he did at Kansas, et cetera. So I'm like, okay, that's fine, but here's my whole point about that. If you're gonna say, well, he did this at D3, and look what he's doing at Kansas, who's terrible, then why is Curt Cignetti not in your top 10? Because what Curt Cignetti did at Indiana, let's not forget this. Kansas has had success in the past in football to some degree. Remember the Todd Reesing, Mark Mangino years when they went to the Orange Bowl, won 10 games? Glenn Mason had some good years at Kansas. Winning at Kansas is very hard. Very hard. I'm not trying to take anything away. I think Lance Leopold is a heck of a football coach. My point, however, is Kansas, you were born in 1997.
Yeah.
So 2 years before you were born, Trev, Glenn Mason won 10 games at Kansas. The next year they went 4-7 and they fired him. So yeah. Kansas has had, and then Mark Mangino was it what was the year with Todd Reesing? Let me find this. I'm going to find the Mark Mangino years in the 2000s. They had a year where they won 10 games with Todd Reesing at quarterback. Give me a second. Here we go. Mark Mangino took over a Kansas team, went 2-10 in his first year. 2007, they went 12-1 and won the Orange Bowl. Lost to Missouri in the Big 12 title game, beat Virginia Tech in the Orange Bowl. 2 years since 1995 to now, 10-plus wins. And we're talking about Lance Leopold, who, again, I think is a really good football coach. We're going to talk about him being in the top 10. Number 7, because of what he's done at Kansas, because it's really hard to win at Kansas, which it is. But his best record at Kansas was 9-4. Like 9-4, they lost at home to Texas Tech. Beat UNLV in a bowl game. And we're not going to count Curt Cignetti, who went 11-2, beat Michigan and beat Nebraska by almost 50, and made it to the college football playoffs at a school that had never had a 10-win season. We're not going to have him in the top 10. You know why that is? That's an emotional person saying, I don't like Curt Cignetti, but I like Lance Leopold. And I'd say that's very fair. I don't particularly care for Curt Cignetti either. I think Lance Leopold's one of the better guys in football from everything I've heard about him. He's a pretty good dude from what I've been told. There's no justification for having Lance Leopold over Curt Cignetti, by the way, who took James Madison, where he won a title, into the FBS, and they went 19-4 in his 2 years as an FBS coach. And then goes to Indiana with 0 career 10-win seasons, and he goes 11-2 in his first year. And he's not in your top 10, but Matt Campbell and Lance Leopold are. He didn't beat any good teams. Well, what happened when Matt Campbell had to go against Arizona State, the Big 12 title game? It's a little different than Ohio State and Notre Dame. Wouldn't you say, Trev?
Slightly.
So, yeah, I just think people don't like Cignetti, and so they're not willing to give him credit for being a really good football coach. And I kind of tend to agree with people when they talk about who Cignetti is. I don't care much for Curt Cignetti. I've been saying this for months. Love the shade that Marcus Freeman threw to him in that first press conference. I Googled him. He's pretty good, because he pulled a 4 Christmases on him. Google me. That was pretty good. And this is a lead writer for The Athletic. This isn't some nobody. We're not pulling up articles from fansided.com or, you know what I mean? Nothing like that. We're talking about national writers for national outlets. USA Today, ESPN, CBS Sports, The Athletic. They're the ones putting this mess out. And you're going to have Lance Leopold ahead of Marcus Freeman. Matt Campbell ahead of Marcus Freeman. Okay.
Yeah, when I saw that on the list, I was like, yeah, I just don't need to read anymore. That's cool.
Yeah.
That list is it's a clown show.
Well, and Andrew, I'm going to push back on your notion that Dillingham. I think if Dillingham needs one more year, I think what Kenny Dillingham did this year at Arizona State is a heck of a job.
Yeah.
You've got to show that you can do that with some level of consistency. And Arizona State is a program that has a history of good football. I mean, they played Ohio State in the Fiesta Bowl one year. So great individual job, but for me to rank him in the top 10 coaches list, I need to see it for more than 1 year at any level. With Cignetti, I can point to success at JMU and then Indiana.
Yeah.
So, and also he didn't inherit in any worse situation at Indiana than what Kenny Dillingham inherited at Arizona State. And it took him 1 year to turn it around. It took Dillingham too. Now, that's still an impressive job. Don't get it twisted. I think Kenny Dillingham did a heck of a job. He's on my radar. If he has another year of 9+ wins, he's going up in my top 15. But you got to do more than just a year.
It's fair. That's fair enough.
Yeah.
Well, in a similar fashion to how we ended the first segment, Bryan, to kind of tie all this together, what does Marcus Freeman need to do in 2025 to be considered on the same level of some of these other coaches?
It's similar. Part of it's similar to what we said about Notre Dame proving it. You've got to make another run. You've got to get back to minimum quarters, but I think semifinals. Because you can't get to the quarters and then Dan Lanning and Steve Sarkisian and these guys get to the semis and then there you go. You got to get back to the semis and you have to avoid the bad losses. And I don't mean bad losses like, dude, you shouldn't have lost to that team. I mean bad losses like, dude, wow, how in the world did you lose to that team? There's no excuse for losing to 3-9 Stanford. None. There's no excuse for losing to Marshall at home. And we can say Marshall's a good football team. They were. Northern Illinois is a good football team. They were. You're Notre Dame. They're a good team. That's a tough out for Toledo. That shouldn't be a tough out for Notre Dame. It's avoid those kind of bad losses. And, make a run. Maximize this football team the way you maximize last year's football team. That's what it comes down to. That's what marks a good football coach. Can you get the most out of your football team? And you can say Lance Leopold did that in 2023. You can't say he did that in 2024. So that's the difference. Curt Cignetti got everything out of that football team last year he could have got out of that football team. I think James Franklin in the postseason got as much out of that football team he's going to get. Regular season, it was typical James Franklin. When they play someone comparable, they're going to get beat. And that's who he is. So we talked about Lanning 9-6 against ranked teams. Sark's 11-9. Freeman's 14-5. Franklin's 6-8 in the last 3 years against ranked teams. 6-8. And some of those wins are over SMU, Boise State, teams like that. Illinois. He hasn't beat any of the big boys. If you look at Penn State, what's Penn State's biggest win the last 2 years, or last 3 years? let's see what that would be. Their biggest win in 2022.
It's probably going to be like an Iowa or something.
Yeah, they beat lost to Michigan bad, lost to Ohio State bad. They beat number 8 Utah in the Rose Bowl, and if I remember correctly, Cam Rising got knocked out of that game. It's okay, so we'll say they beat Utah. All right. Beat number 24 Iowa, lost to Ohio State, lost to Michigan, lost to Ole Miss, went 1-3 against ranked teams. And this past year, their best win was what? Illinois at 19, and then SMU, who was 10, Boise, who was 9. So your best win is what? The Rose Bowl against Utah 2 years ago. It's your best win.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I echo the
conversation.
I echoed the same as you. Marcus Freeman has to eliminate the bad losses, and as a team, he has to get them back to that stage of where they're at. Because you could make that, like Marcus Freeman got the most out of his team, but there was still potential left out there because of the amount of injuries, you know, and so he has to continue to maximize his roster. So I'm with you. Any final thoughts on these rankings as a whole?
What's going to be fun and what I love about sports, Trev, is we get to find out it gets settled on the field. And that's the fun part. And all these coaches have, well, not all of them. A lot of these coaches have. I mean, week 1, you get a chance to make a statement. You know, week 1, it's like, okay, what are you going to do? You know, Steve Sarkisian gets to go to Columbus. That's a statement opportunity, right? I mean, you go into Columbus and beat them in game 1. That's a statement opportunity. That's you get to say something about who you are as a football team. Notre Dame has to go to Miami. Oregon State, Oregon boy, they got that real tough opener against Montana State. And then they got the mighty Cowboys of Oklahoma State at home. And then 2 weeks later, they got to play Oregon State at home, really loading up on that tough non-conference schedule. That's another reason I don't respect Dan Lanning. The longer he's there, the softer their schedule gets. So got to prepare for those really tough Big Ten games against Indiana and, you know, who everybody tells us isn't good, and Rutgers and Wisconsin and Iowa and Minnesota and Northwestern. Well, let me see here. Is there no Michigan, no Ohio State? Yeah, it's going to be brutal, man. Brutal. Got to get that one game against Penn State. Whew, hope you can make it. Hope you can survive that one game.
That's fair. No, that is fair enough. So moving forward here, Brian, we do have a couple of mailbag questions, a couple super chats.
Just a couple, yeah. Yeah, we won't make it a full segment. We'll just kind of get to these real quick. We'll start off with Patrick McGrain.
Super chat from Patrick. Thank you, Patrick. I think their rankings are based purely on perceived talent. Guys like McElroy are realizing that Notre Dame actually has a lot of talent and not just 1 or 2 high-end players.
Honestly, Patrick, I think that's a great comment. I don't think that some of these coaches even really think they really have more than one high-end. I think there's some writers who probably don't know who Leonard Moore is. Like, how does the editors, Schlaball and the editors, looked at Notre Dame's list and were like, yeah, we should probably – nobody said we should probably add Leonard Moore to this, at least the top returners list. You can't even give me the top returners list. I get it. You got 25 teams you got to write a blurb about. You can't include every player. I went through that. I was like, well, I got to delete that because this is now getting really freaking long. And if I do this for every team, it's going to take me 3 weeks. But you couldn't even list him on the top returning starters list? Tells me you don't know who the heck he is. That's pretty sad for a college football writer not to have, man.
I was about to say, you can't even put in like a backhanded compliment of like Leonard Moore had a great freshman season. Let's see if he can repeat it in year 2.
Right. You have no concept of who he is. Like he's not even a thing to you in your mind. Yeah. I think Patrick's point is spot on. I think there's a lot of writers who live more by narratives.
Oh, yeah.
That's why with Greg McElroy, I agree with some stuff he says and don't agree with other things because it's more of whereas a lot of these sports writers, I'm like, I just disagree with almost everything you're saying right now because it's all just lazy analysis. Mm-hmm. With some other guys like McElroy, David Pollack, there's things we agree on, things we don't agree on. You're going to get more of that when it's actual football analysis because it's subjective. I can look at this team and say, hey, I think this team is more talented than you do because I'm making a subjective opinion on their offensive line or their quarterback or whatever the case may be. And so it's a different type. There's a level of consistency to that. Well, it doesn't matter to me about the experience of a quarterback as much as the talent. Well, then why do you have this versus that? Because I just don't think that guy's that good.
Yeah.
Okay, fair. We can live with that. Like if Charles Power was doing a ranking and he's like, dude, I'm not high on Notre Dame starting CJ Carr this year. I'm like, that's consistent with what he had as CJ as a high school recruit. I wouldn't have a problem with that. He's been consistent. So, but some of these, like, you don't have a clue who Leonard Moore is, do you? If I started talking to you names and Notre Dame players, you'd be like, I don't know who that is.
I'll also give credit where it's due. I listened to Joel Klatt's podcast last night on my drive home, and he went through his post-spring top 25, and his analysis of Notre Dame was correct. It then didn't really follow up with where he had them ranked.
That's the interesting thing about Joel Klatt. You'll listen to him for an hour, and then if he were to put his rankings, like let's say you missed that he was doing a ranking and you just thought he was going through teams. Like, dude, he's really high on Notre Dame, man. Like, where do they rank? 6th? Mm-hmm. After all, that's funny because, again, I think Joel Klatt's in this dichotomy of he's a mouthpiece for the network, and I don't mean that negatively. I mean, he's literally the lead analyst for Fox Sports. Fox Sports has a relationship with the Big Ten, and I believe also the Big 12 still, but definitely the Big Ten. Okay, I get it. You are going to toe the company line and let's hype up the Big Ten just like the SEC gets hyped up by ESPN. I get that. I'm fine. But like you said, though, Trev, his analysis when breaking the teams down,
yeah,
it's good. Even when I disagree with something, I'll be like, I see what you're saying. I just don't agree. I think that guy's maybe a little better than you do or not as good as you do, but it's a football disagreement and you can respect it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yesterday in the show, you were talking, Notre Dame, Marcus Freeman's recruited well. They've gotten faster. They've gotten longer. They've gotten bigger and all that stuff. And so, yeah, Joel Klatt, it was, to your point, it was weird because I was like, I fast forwarded to where I thought the conversation was going to be for Notre Dame because that's really kind of one of the only ones I cared about listening to, really just the top 10. But I caught it at the right time, and I was like, okay, here we go. Like, he's hyping Notre Dame up. It was kind of towards the end of the podcast. I was like, all right, maybe we should talk about 4th, 5th. Okay. Out of the top 5, I was like, interesting. But his analysis was spot on. So,
yeah, and I just like consistency. So if you're going to be in the chat saying I love Lance Leopold because he took over the worst team in college football and he won 9 games, how are you then going to get mad at somebody else for criticizing Deion Sanders for winning 9 games in that same league when he inherited the worst roster in college football? I just like consistency. So if you're going to praise Lance Leopold for the roster he built, then I think we should also be praising Deion Sanders for what he did, don't you think? Just hypothetically speaking in this particular instance. But yeah, just I like consistency, Trev. I do. But no, I think there's like McElroy's like that. Like I'll listen to his analysis of the Notre Dame backs and I can say, well, I'd have Jadarian in the top 10, but then you listen to him break down Jadarian, like take away where he ranked Jadarian. You think he should be top 10. He doesn't. That's fair. But listen to the analysis. Was he accurate in describing Jadarian's skills? Yeah, he was. Mm-hmm. He clearly likes Jadarian. I just don't agree with the ranking. I can always live with that. So I think he's right. You're seeing more football people starting to understand that this team is different than past Notre Dame teams. I think you're spot on. It's good. It's a good observation.
Another super chat from Beefeater ND08. Thank you for the super chat. Appreciate that. Brian, agree with everything you're saying. The only thing giving me pause with Penn State is Notre Dame is 0-4 versus Jim Knowles. Even James Franklin can't mess up Knowles.
A, yes, he can. But B, they're 0-3. I said this in the chat. They're 0-3. He was not the D coordinator when they played Oklahoma State. But Ohio State's different than Penn State. I mean, I think this is a fair comment to make. It is. My pushback, however, would be they didn't lose the national title game this year because of Jim Knowles. Notre Dame's offense, when they weren't shooting themselves in the foot, was moving the ball pretty good on Ohio State. Yeah, they lost because they couldn't stop Ohio State's offense. Most of the mistakes the offense had in that game were self-inflicted wounds, not the other way around. So that's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I'm with you.
Yep.
I'm with you.
So let's get to another one. All right, here we go. Sorry. Keys to the car. We're going to talk about that scheduling stuff in a later show. So I'm not going to do that one right now.
Tommy Guns. It's pretty crazy Do Mark and these other people have day jobs and just moonlight as college football analysts? You get paid 6 to 7 figures to do your job.
Yeah.
I don't
mean,
know.
they still drive revenue. I mean, people are going to click on the links. So I kind of get that. That's ultimately what it's about now. It's like people make fun of, get mad at that guy for On 3 that covers Michigan, and they get so mad at him. I'm like, On 3 loves it because you keep clicking on his article every time you're mad. You keep clicking on his tweets every time you're mad. And that's all they care about. But I think overall, I think Mark Schlabach's pretty good this was bad. This ranking was really bad. It was very lazy. It's like they were like, hey, man, we need you to do this. And he was like, oh, crap, it's due tomorrow. I forgot. Let me just quickly throw this together. Like, that's what I took it as. He's normally better than this. I usually tend to enjoy reading Mark Schlabach's analysis. This was not the norm for him, in my opinion. Like, even when he would not rank Notre Dame as high during the season as I thought he should, you could understand his reasoning to a degree.
Some of it, too, is I think that other people are taking other people's lackadaisical work as their foundation of finding information. And I'm not saying like people are plagiarizing other people, not making that claim at all. I'm just saying I think other writers are taking what other writers say. It's like, okay, well, what did so-and-so have Notre Dame ranked as? Like, oh, okay, like 6, 7. Okay. Yeah, I see that too. Why did they have him ranked that? Okay, yeah, they lost Riley Leonard. Steve's gone. Don't have Xavier Watts, new defensive coordinator. Okay, that's the story, and I'm sticking with it. And so, like I said, not a plagiarizing type of deal, but I just think that they haven't looked at that team specifically. And it's not just the case for Notre Dame, because if that was the case, why the heck is Texas Tech ranked where they are? Why is IU ranked where they are? Why is Alabama ranked not where they are? But the common trends that you're starting to see is LSU's catching a lot of hype. Georgia's catching a lot of hype. And look, this is coming from somebody who put LSU in their top 10 in the preseason, because I am on the ceiling side of LSU. And some of it is just, I don't really have an explanation for it. Like I've said before, sometimes Brian Kelly is just due for that random season. That could be this year. Who knows? Because I like the talent of their roster. I just have to see him do it. But, I think it's a lot of that, Tommy. I really do.
I agree. Couple more before we get out of here, Trev. Let's see here. Here we go.
Question from A. Regan. If you could change or improve anything about the Notre Dame IB fan base going into the 2025 season, what would it be?
I think more people subscribe to the message board. That's what I would want. Seriously, like more people subscribe to the message board. More people that listen to the show on a regular basis who aren't on the message board subscribe to the message board. Like there are aspects of the fan base, and this would be true anywhere, that you don't like, you don't agree with, or certain people that just are negative, or people that are overly positive and things like that. That's every fan base. And that's part of what makes it fun. Part of what makes it fun is that you don't go into every show and every single person agrees with everything you say. That gets boring after a while. You hope that people make good sound arguments when they disagree with you, but I don't mind that. And the thing in anything that I would change about the fan base would be something I'd like to change about humanity. I wish people were more decent to each other. Somebody disagrees with something I say, so they want to jump into my appearance. Like, I said something Andrew Gilmore didn't like in the chat. Did he respond with, you're an idiot, you're fat, No, he said I'm lame. It's like, okay, fine, that's fair, that's fine. I disagree with what he's saying, but like, it's not, maybe he's come up with like a personal tweet since then that I haven't seen. Like, I don't mind that. It's banter on the chat. I'm talking about people that jump into your mentions and start insulting you personally.
Yeah.
But that's every fan base, and that's such a small number of people. Very small number of people. I think overall the Notre Dame fan base is pretty good, and you have different people from different places. It's like any fan base and anything. There's a small number of people that like to be loud and obnoxious, and they start to come across like they're that's how those fans are. No, that's just how their fans are on social media, because those people talk all the time, where the normal fans are like at their jobs or with their families or doing normal people things, not spending all day on Twitter trying to troll people.
Yeah. Yeah. Overall, big picture, if I could change anything, I wish more fans, and this is, again, could be said for everybody, I wish they would enjoy the moment more. Notre Dame is going through a time where I haven't seen in my lifetime following this team. And I'm young, but I'm not 10. And it's exciting. And we get so many questions and we get so many things put on the board. It's like, what's going to happen in 2027 if this, it's like, guys, like, 25 is going to be a magical season.
Yeah.
It really is. I truly believe that. 24 was a very magical season. We get questions about, well, when Marcus Freeman leaves, it's like, well, he's not yet. Like, let's just enjoy the ride of when he's here, because I don't want to miss that, because I'm looking forward too much of what happens when it's not.
That's actually a good one. And I would look at it this way too. There's a lot of Notre Dame fans, especially some older ones than you, who are almost always waiting on the shoe to drop. And they can't enjoy the present because they're worried, well, what's going to happen when Marcus Freeman leaves? Like you said, I have no idea. How about you just enjoy, if he leaves in a year, 2 years, or 10, however long you have him, enjoy it. And then you can worry about who replaces him after the fact. Well, what are they going to do when this? Who knows? How about you? But that's not the case right now. How about you enjoy this? And that's, enjoy it. And I think last year, a lot of the negativity about the team and the talking them down, like Sean and I were talking about this. I was so frustrated by the fan base last year before the season. Like, why are people not more excited about this team? Like, you guys talking about they're going to lose to A&M? Like, really? Why isn't there more excited about that? I don't understand. It just blew my mind. I started to get really frustrated.
Yeah.
But it's almost, but then you're just like, they don't want to get excited because they don't want to feel the same pain that we see all the time when we get excited about Notre Dame, and then they pull the rug out from underneath you, or Lucy pulls the football, away from Charlie Brown. Like, I kind of get that, but I'd say, look, let's just focus on the positives. After you sign up for the IB message board at boards.oshbreakdown.com, which is something that all Notre Dame fans should do, then what you should then do is start focusing more on the positives. You can still be critical and be honest and objective but still be positive.
Yeah.
And that's, and stop rooting for the average talents at quarterback all the time. That's the other thing. It's like, there's this weird thing with Notre Dame fans where every time there's like some stud recruit and some mediocre talent, a big chunk of the fan base is like, no, but I want the mediocre talent to start because he's a Notre Dame guy. What does that mean? Notre Dame guys are like average, but they're try-hard guys. Like, I don't want the starting quarterback to be Rudy's cousin. I want him to be a freaking stud. I want to be the All-American and act like it. That's what I want. Like, why do we always got to root for like the mediocre quarterback? Like, I don't understand that. Because he led him on a field goal drive at the end of the half. It's like, what are we doing here, man? What are we doing? Why do we always do this? Ian Book's the best quarterback Notre Dame's had in 20 years. What? What are you talking about? Oh gosh, that's my biggest pet peeve right there, Travis. Why is there that portion of the fan base that just obsesses over the mediocre talent at quarterback? Wait until we get some, I'm not going to say it because that's a shot at the kid, but some kid's going to sign as like a 3-year depth player, and they're going to be like, wait till so-and-so. It's hilarious. It's really hilarious. I've complained with you about that off the air.
I know.
So I had to say that publicly.
I was about to say, well, I guess if we're at this point of the show, what else I would change is I would go from oh, that's good. That's funny.
Oh, I'm going to say this. Let's do this last one before we get out of here, Trev.
Yeah, absolutely. Lucky Duck 512. How much do you think recruiting rankings from national services play in how national media people view Notre Dame?
A ton. I do think there's a lot to that. I think there's a lot to that when you look at like Oregon and Texas and teams. I do. And like you'll listen to Josh Pate, who I like Josh, and he had him on the show, and I've met him a couple times, and his show's entertaining. But he'll admit, like, he'll like, well, look at the recruiting rankings. Like, that's why he thought, like, what other justification do you have for someone who's going to say during last season that LSU has a higher ceiling than Notre Dame? Other than he just looks at recruiting rankings and thinks that LSU's got a better roster. They don't. Why do someone like him watch A&M and watch Notre Dame and come to the conclusion that A&M is going to beat Notre Dame? Perception of talent based on recruiting rankings. There's nobody could watch those two rosters over the last year before and say that team's going to beat that is better than that team. No way. Other than they ranked here in recruitings, they ranked here in recruitings.
That's a good point. No, I'm with you, man.
I think that's a big part of it, Trev. Very big part of it.
I'm with you.
Very big part of it. So I think that's a good place to end this show. Thank you for the super chats, Beefeater, Patrick McCrane. We'll be back tomorrow for the mailbag, Trev. I'm excited. It's going to be a fun mailbag. We've had a lot of rants this week. So hopefully we won't have any tomorrow, guys. I can see some of these guys like, I'm going to try to see what I can ask Driscoll tomorrow to get them all fired up. Please don't. I've had enough rants for the week.
Well, until tomorrow, where there may or may not be a rant, make sure to have all of your mailbag questions ready for the Friday free-for-all mailbag. But before you head out of here, please be sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast with your friends and family, anybody that you know loves Notre Dame and college football as much as you do. Now, I know we've already talked about it on today's show, but look, guys, the best way to stay in the now, stay involved with what's going on with Notre Dame football, subscribe to the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. A lot of the conversations that we've had this week, some that we're going to have tomorrow from the Friday free-for-all mailbag, are currently ongoing right now in the Champions Lounge at boards.irishbreakdown.com. So my man's not going to have a voice by the end of the week.
Please no. Please no. Please don't do that.
Oh, my goodness. But until tomorrow at 1 p.m., that's Bryan. I'm Trevor. We'll see you back here very soon on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.